Chapter 1157. It just so happened that Su Fengnian had obtained a large stack of intelligence reports from the Fushui room on the military town of Guangling over the years. Su Fengnian originally knew that the Zhao family's emperor had appointed the old Grand Preceptor of West Shu, Sun Shiji, as the administrator. It seemed like he was letting the tiger return to the mountain, but in reality, he was inviting the tiger into the jar so that he could catch the big turtle in the jar. However, looking at the truth that had been carefully analyzed, Su Fengnian could be sure of one thing. Those garrison generals who complained to their subordinates that the court lacked pay were all righteous and confident. They said that the court was too biased toward the two Liao defense lines, but in reality, it was just them filling their own pockets. Under the joint leadership of Zhang Jilu and the Minister of Revenue, Wang Xianxia, who was extremely skilled at turning stone into gold, the court had never treated the garrison troops in the territory unfairly. It was not strange to say that the local garrison troops were making a ruckus, and that the child who knew how to shout would get milk. But in Su Fengnian's view, the manners of these generals of the Guangling Path were really terrible to a shocking level. However, this was Zhang Jilu reaping what he had sown. At the beginning, it was he who had single-handedly created the situation of Southerners going up north as ministers, Northerners going down south as generals. Although this action had separated the two powerful groups in Jiangnan and the north from their respective areas, after those northern generals had been led to Guangling Path, they had the support of the neighboring families near the place where the Zhao family had risen. How could these martial artists, who were proud of the fact that their father's generation had built the country, have good table manners? Guangling Path was also the place where the court had taken the lead in squeezing out criminals. How could they have any fear? After more than a dozen years, almost every position with real power had been taken by turns to plunder and plunder. Who cared about the people's livelihood and public opinion? Su Fengnian said quietly, "Too much is as bad as not enough." Su Fengnian rose and walked to a wall. On the wall hung a geographical map that included the old Chu territory and the entire southern part of the capital. If the name was not legitimate, the words would not be reasonable. If the words were not reasonable, the matter would not be accomplished. Currently, both Liang and West Chu could be considered legitimate rulers. The former was sitting on the country and wanted to quell the rebellion, while the latter was waving the banner of the Orthodox Central Plains. This was not 200 years after the fall of the country, but only 20 years later. When West Chu was destroyed, even the historians believed that the emperor, the officials, and the common people did not deserve to live. The destruction of West Chu was even more lamented by countless scholars as the sinking of the divine land. Su Fengnian looked at the map. It was different from the usual rough maps of the territory. The geography of the mountains and rivers and the military towns were extremely detailed. As long as there was a possibility of a military base being used, there was not a single place left out. Furthermore, the number of soldiers and residents of each place were clearly marked and often changed at the last minute. On this map, there were hidden movements and stillness. The ones that were still were Prince Jingnan's various troops and horses, as well as the temporary assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Lu Xingxiang's tent, which was temporarily conferred the title of Great General, Yang Xinxing's infantry, which was mainly 40,000 elite troops, and Yin Jinchuan's cavalry, which was mainly 30,000 troops. It was said that Lu Xingxiang's Yulu Pass was difficult to issue military orders. Yang Xinxing's troops were in the Xiyu area, eyeing covetously. Behind this veteran General Xianxia was a large group of nobles and aristocrats waiting to be fed. Xiyu had many mountains and rivers, as well as many tunnels and valleys. It was neither a dead place for military strategists, nor a lonely place. They were connected by the same breath and branches. As for Yin Jinchuan's Dongyu Plain, it was a plain. The terrain was flat and wide. Although there was no danger to take refuge in, it had been convenient for cavalry troops since ancient times. If it were not for the fact that Yin Jinchuan rarely interacted with the nobles and aristocrats in the capital, there would be more people who would want to join old General Yan's army, so that they could gain more military merits earlier. Anyway, the remnants of West Chu could be crushed with a snap of the fingers. When the time came, How could the two-legged foot soldiers run faster than the cavalry troops on horseback? The three troops did not move for the time being. However, according to the latest spy report, West Chu's military strength had been surging in the dark. Other than the south, which was relatively quiet, the old capital's military strength had spread out in all directions. This was especially so in the north, where there was no fixed number. At a glance, it was like a headless fly flying around, full of obvious flaws. Su Fengnian squinted at the map, trying to guess Chao Chongqing, the Confucian general who did not shine during the Chunqiu period. Su Fengnian was in Beiliang. Although he was only a defender after his father's generation had conquered the country, he knew the importance of an ambush. The thousands of armored soldiers in Mount Qingsheng and the two groups of horse gang at the border were like this. It was the same for the cavalry troops that were placed in the western region to drive the troops up north. When placed in a battle, it also required accurate input of the following troops. This was why the heavy cavalry could make the final decision on the battlefield. In the past few years, around the Old West Chu, there had always been many roaming bandits crossing the border and causing trouble. The fact that the Prince of Guangling Zhao Yi's troops could maintain a relatively high fighting strength was largely due to the contributions of these training targets. This was why Zhao Yi did not think highly of the Prince of Yanqi and claimed that he could challenge the Beiliang cavalry. Among the vassals, the Prince of Jiaodong, Zhao Sui, had the geographical advantage of being at the border. However, under the double suppression of the court and Gu Jiantang, he could not fight the Beimang head-on. His combat strength had been declining in these years. Su Fengnian was searching for the location of Chao Chongqing's elite troops. He believed that the leaders of the Ministry of War in Great Peace City were also looking with wide eyes. In the past, the Chu, who wanted to rule the world, had the war Saint Jiang Baikue as a stabilizing force. More importantly, he had many good generals, 120,000 great halberd warriors, and a large cavalry army that had been fed with gold and silver. Both light and heavy cavalry were invincible. Now, the great halberd warriors of West Chu had disappeared, and the new heavy cavalry had not surfaced. The forces that appeared on the map were mainly the 20,000 rebels in charge of guarding the old capital of West Chu and the 80,000 soldiers in the various military towns and passes. The roaming bandits hidden in various places were conservatively estimated to be no less than 30,000 people. Their combat strength was far above the 80,000, and they were on par with the 20,000 troops. However, when two countries fought, the foundation supported by the people and the power of the country was very important. With reputation, there would be sources of soldiers. The people were willing to fight for it. Only with wealth could one not lose in terms of equipment. Two armies of roughly equal strength, the number of weapons and the quality of their armor were enough to decide the outcome, unless one side's general made a fatally stupid order. But the problem was that almost no one could be sure whether there were thousands or tens of thousands of West Chu survivors who would die for the Jiang character. Su Fengnian's gaze shifted further north, where Gu Jiantang's 300,000 border troops were, the true elite of the Liang dynasty. Su Fengnian slowly retracted his gaze and turned his head to look at the border between western Shu and southern Zhao, two of the best soldiers in the Liang dynasty. One had nothing to do and did not dare to go north, nor could he go south. The other was looking for trouble, using the Huangmu rebellion as an excuse to bring troops south. It was said that he only brought 800 soldiers. Su Fengnian sat back down at the table and closed his eyes in concentration. There was no map of Liang Mang's confrontation hanging in the room, because there was no need to look at it. It was all engraved in his mind. There was also no need for him, the king of Beiliang, to do his utmost in military affairs at the border. The reason was very simple. After nearly 20 years of hard work, the defense of Beiliang's border had reached the pinnacle. If the northern Mang only sent 400,000 soldiers from the southern dynasty to the south, Beiliang would eat them up without hesitation. If Beimang sent all of its troops south, it would be nothing more than a battle to the death. Of course, it could also be understood as helplessly waiting for death. To put it nicely, it would be mutual destruction. Su Fengyin walked out of the room and came to the side of the elephant washing pond. The small path was paved with cobblestones in the pond, tight and orderly. After being washed by the rain and pond water year after year, the cobblestones, which were originally not very sharp, had become even smoother and rounder. Su Fengyin took off his boots and held them in his hands. He slowly walked on the cobblestone path, a cool but not cold, comfortable feeling seeping into the soles of his feet. Su Fengyin jumped onto a large stone and lay down, looking at the starry sky and closing his eyes. How many tens of thousands of people on the Guangling Road would not survive this autumn? How many tens of thousands of Bailiang would not survive the next autumn? Chapter 1158. In the main general's tent outside Yulu Pass, the atmosphere was heavy and strange. An urgent military report was delivered by the Liu family's personal guards. The assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Liu Xianxia, was sitting behind the table. His expression did not change as his finger gently stroked a commander's seal. Inside the tent, the generals and captains were divided into two groups. Most of these generals were brought to the capital by Assistant Minister Liu from Guangling Circuit. There was no doubt about their loyalty and ability. Some of them were steady old men who had been nurtured by the flames of war during the spring and autumn period. Some were talented military officers who were in the prime of their lives and were eager to make progress. There were also a few young captains who were promoted as exceptions. A trusted subordinate who was sent to be a coachman rushed into the tent with his, but on fire. None of the guards stopped him. Liu Xingxiang did not even bat an eyelid. He just lowered his head and looked at the old map that was taken from the Ministry of Revenue with great difficulty. It was funny that even though Gu Lu had kept the Ministry of War for many years, he could not find a map of the southern part of the capital that satisfied Liu Xingxiang. However, he could easily find a few hundred maps of the border between the two Liao provinces. Guo Dongfeng, who smelled of horse urine, glared at his peers who were rejoicing in his misfortune and asked loudly, "General, did that Yang Xinxing eat the wrong medicine? Why did he take the initiative to hastily advance towards the south? Is he so confident that he can break through Yufeng Pass, cross the Qinshui crossing, and then take down the most important town in the north of Guangling Road, Xiao? If he rushes in like this, what will happen to our two armies? General, what do you think? Are we going to watch him lead a bunch of hedonistic sons to their deaths? Or are we going to accompany them in playing with fire? Damn it, 40,000 soldiers and horses, that is the last of Southern Ji Army. Once they cross the Qinshui crossing, before they reach Biao Town, that place has always been the Qingyang Basin, a place where battles have been fought since ancient times. Now, we are completely in the dark about the mobilization of soldiers in Guangling Circuit. Where did this old man get the confidence to penetrate deep into that place alone? No matter how useless West Chu is, they can at least squeeze out 8,000 to 9,000 soldiers who can fight, right? What if the garrison general of Biao Town is faking his surrender? As the great general of a kingdom, you will be defeated by such a clumsy strategy to lure the enemy. At that time, won't you be the one to take the blame? Liu Xianxiang did not even raise his head as he said calmly, "First of all, we can confirm that the arrogant guard, General Han Penglai, is not faking his surrender. Secondly, they had 40,000 elite soldiers from Jinan, and their supplies were perfect. The great general of a kingdom was good at organizing his army, and he was good at advancing his army step by step. Even if they were faced with an army of 8,000 to 9,000 cavalrymen, as long as there were no heavy cavalrymen launching a surprise attack, they would not necessarily lose. In the end, no one dared to say whether or not the remnants of West Chu would be able to deploy nearly 10,000 cavalry at the front line of Buxiao Qingyang. Because of geographical limitations, West Chu had always fought on foot in the west and on horseback in the east. Of course, if you meet a lunatic, it's hard to say. Guo Dongfeng stiffened his neck and said, "But the Ministry of War's established strategy is to let the Duke of Huainan Zhao Ying, who is stationed at the Slippery Platform, and the King of Jing and Zhao Sun, who is stationed at Haiyou Lake, launch the attack at the same time. No matter whether they succeed or not, it should be Zhao Yi, Prince of Guangling's turn next. How could it be Yang Xinxing's turn? Xianxia angrily rebuked. You think you can call the name of the vassal king? Scram back to feed your horses. Guodongfeng shrunk his neck and obediently left the tent. Soon, he lifted the curtain and poked his head out, asking curiously, General, may I ask where that Commander Cao Changqing, Zhou Song, Pei Hongji, and the other elders are now? Lu Shengxiang continued to stare at the map. It was a young general from the Guangling Spring Snow building who laughed softly and said, Cao Changqing is personally watching the Guangling army. Zhou Song and Pei Hongji are not near the northern line. One is guarding the Huai River, the other is guarding the river. Guodongfeng made an O sound and turned to leave, muttering to himself, It seems that West Chu is not the Chu after all. They no longer have the courage to fight outside their borders. Waiting for Guodongfeng to walk far away, Lu Shengxiang raised his head to look at an old man in a scholarly robe who stood out like a crane among chickens. He asked, Has Zhao Gou's side found any traces of horse movement on the Guangling Road's northern line? The old man helplessly said, It's difficult. The war hasn't even started yet, but more than 40 spies from the imperial court have died. In addition to the 20 or so people who betrayed us before, this is not a good sign. Lu Shengxiang made an O sound and waved his hand, indicating for everyone to leave. The assistant minister of the Ministry of War, who led the general, glanced at the military report. On it, there was a general explanation of the reasons for sending troops down south. The wording was beautiful and the style was exquisite. Naturally, it was not something that Yang Xinxing could write. Even if Lu Shengxiang used his but to think, he knew that it was the work of someone who was familiar with military books. Although the south of the capital is the central province of the world, the stone of hegemony, it cannot be accepted. It must be guarded outside the borders. The reason for the fall of southern Tang cannot be ignored. Lu Shengxiang softly said, Armchair strategist, screw your mother. The first year of Xiangfu, autumn, summer. The summer heat was over and the weather was turning cold. Chapter 1159. Finally, there was a refreshing feeling of autumn. This made the nearly 1,000 new soldiers who had hurriedly joined the army in the middle of summer feel relieved of a heavy burden. Their sickly expressions were swept away, and they immediately became more energetic. Especially when the army was crossing the Qin River to the south. These young men, who were mostly riding tall and fine horses, did not care about the river crossing formation. One after another, they donned bright armor and galloped on the Hebei shore, competing in riding skills. In fact, not long after these people joined the army, many of them had the idea of returning to the capital to enjoy life. This was because the military camp was too smelly. It was worse than a pigsty, and it was not easy to bathe. Previously, in the middle of summer, these young men had personally experienced the power of being covered in fleas. This was far from the beautiful original intention in their hearts of two armies facing each other and killing the enemy. If not for the elders and their families persuading them in every way possible, and at the same time continuously sending large amounts of prohibited items through their connections, these descendants of nobles, marquises, generals, and ministers would have to pinch their noses and continue to suffer in the old General Yang Xinxing's army. Almost all of the thousands of connections that grew up under the emperor's feet brought their personal guards and retainers. This allowed the general of a kingdom to have 3,000 elite cavalry under his command. When the army went south, more than a dozen young masters of noble families went to ask Yang Xinxing for permission to be the vanguard. The old general smiled and gave a bunch of excuses. He also vowed that these 3,000 cavalry were his trump card. A good knife should be used on the edge of the knife. The tall and sturdy Yang Xinxing stood on the south shore with one hand on his knife. Beside him, the eldest son Yang Huqin, who had followed his father for more than 20 years, had a bitter expression. He looked at the young men riding their horses and said softly, "Father, I don't know which young man said that when the army is crossing the river, we have to be careful of enemy attacks. Therefore, they want to help the roaming cavalry protect the emperor. Don't these kids know about the matter of scouts? In this way, other than disrupting the formation and delaying the crossing of the river, there is no use at all. There was even the second son of the Marquis of Guanyi, who asked me if I could allow him to challenge the enemy general when the two armies were fighting. What kind of nonsense is this? I don't know what kind of nonsense novel he read. Also, the eldest son of Count Zhen Ting objected. He said that marching 50 li a day was too slow and even used the analogy of a turtle crawling. He said that during the Spring and Autumn War, it was common for the light cavalry to travel 300 li a day in a night. Sigh, there was really no way to reason with them. Father, their 3,000 cavalry may look majestic, but they are actually incapable of accomplishing anything. The white-haired Yang Xianxia was extremely imposing as he lectured. I know what I'm doing. Hu Chun, you mustn't show any dissatisfaction in the future. Yang Huchen smiled bitterly and didn't say anything. Yang Xianxia restrained her rigid expression and said earnestly, on the Eastern Front, Gu Jiantang is in charge of military affairs. On the Western Front, the young man named Su from Bailiang is in charge. Neither of them is easy to deal with. The world is peaceful, so how hard is it to achieve military merits? The remnants of West Chu had rebelled, and the southern line had appeared out of nowhere. This kind of opportunity was something that father had risked half of his life to forcefully snatch. When it came to relationships and seniority, most of the children on the North Bank would call you uncle. But these brats, although they were warm and attentive, they were cold and hard to please. You mustn't do bad things out of good intentions and cause us to give them military exploits. If they don't appreciate it, they won't take our Yang family's kindness into consideration. Yang Huchen nodded his head gloomily. Yang Xianxia patted the shoulder of the son who had high hopes for him and smiled. Let's not talk about other things. If it weren't for the operation of these young men's parents, we wouldn't have been able to get those 5,000 good horses. The old soldiers of Southern Ji are only known for fighting on foot. This time, my grandson has had his fill of riding, and this grandson is much more tactful than you. He has already started to calm many of the people in the capital who are not familiar with him. This is a great thing. Yang Huchen finally smiled. Yang Xianxia sighed softly. When a tiger is in a cage for a long time, it will inevitably have to retract its claws. Not everyone can leave the cage. Look at the dragon General Su Gong of the Gumu Su family. He missed this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Although you are one rank lower than him now, it will be hard to say in the future. Yang Huchen nodded his head. Yang Xianxia removed his sword and turned to point to the south. The old antiques of West Chu that father likes, like Pei Hongji of the Pei family, as well as Zhou Song and Zhu Yinliang, are still being held back in the south-central part of Guangling Road, according to secret reports. Chao Changqing is going to confront Zhao Yi. As long as we attack the Bai Ao military town in one go and snatch the merit on hand, victory will be in our grasp. Afterwards, whether we advance or retreat, the imperial court will have a lot of leeway. As for the criticism from the Ministry of War, can it compare to the spittle of the imperial court elders behind the soldiers of the dukes and marquises on the North Bank? As for Lu Xingxiang, let's forget about him. He is just an assistant minister of the Ministry of War from the Spring Snow Building. He is not worth mentioning. The only small variable is whether or not there will be people at Xingyang Basin who are brave enough to come and stop us. Yang Huchen smiled. It's good that they came. That child Wenqi is holding his breath. In the future, our Yang family will not rely on me, but on this Confucian general. Yang Xianxia nodded and suddenly sneered. Chao Changqing is a Confucian general. Unfortunately, his fate is not good. The northern border town of Guangling was noisy. Han Pinglai, the garrison general who first rebelled against Liang and then West Chu, died suddenly. After his head was cut off, it was placed on the priceless red sandalwood desk. Other than his trusted subordinates, Zhao Go, 6 senior spies, and more than 300 people from a Jianghu sect died with him. The new owner of the general's mansion was a handsome young master who had a reputation for being a romantic and elegant man in Guangling. He was the eldest grandson of the Pei family, one of the 10 great clans of Spring and Autumn, Pei Sui. Pei Sui ordered someone to take away the head that died with remaining grievances and methodically began to take over the affairs of the military town. He did not show any unfamiliarity after taking over a magpie's nest. He was extremely familiar with the military affairs here. Pei Sui gripped his brush tightly and said in a deep voice, "It all depends on you, Xianxia. Everyone in the world is watching this battle. 40,000 old soldiers of Jinan. We must take them all." Chapter 1160. The 40,000 old soldiers of Jinan safely passed through the green vine basin. Old General Yang Xianxia even stopped his horse on a high slope at the border and looked back. He seemed to be relieved that they did not encounter any ambush, but also disappointed that they did not encounter any tough battle. This great general of a kingdom had many secrets, and he did not even tell his son, Yang Huchen. The son was not as good as the grandson. His grandson, Yang Wenqi, was the only talented commander in the family, but he was too young. Yang Xianxia did not wish for this child to be tainted by the schemes of the officialdom. His son, Yang Huchen, was only a talented general, so it was useless to say more. As a matter of fact, the victory of Yang clan's army in southern Ji had nothing to do with the overall situation. Even if Chao Zhangqing had the intention of having a good start, he would only have his eyes on Yin Jinchuan, the fat piece of meat. Only by wiping out the 30,000 cavalrymen on the eastern Yu Plain could he prevent himself from being humiliated by others. Yang Xianxia smiled. The reason why Yin Jinchuan was not willing to accept those young men who had never gone in a battle was not because he did not have a good relationship with the nobles and officials in the capital, but also because he was clear about his dangerous situation. He did not dare to take the opportunity to build a good relationship with the influential families in Great Peace City. If a few dozen young men from aristocratic families died, it would be the same as offending a few dozen influential families in the capital. On the battlefield, who would care about the status of your parents? When they were in a killing frenzy, a head was a military merit. Yang Xianxia was thinking about how to find new opportunities to feed those playboys after he took over the command of the Baiao army town. When the old general heard a series of sharp whistles, his eyelids twitched uncontrollably. He leaped onto his horse and rode towards the south. A rider broke into the formation, and no one stopped him. It was an elite scout from Jinan. At the moment, he was seriously injured, and there was an arrow stuck in his back. Scouts were all light and fast riders. In order to pursue the fastest speed, other than the crossbows and sabers that were necessary for close combat, they would not wear any armor. Yang Xianxia spurred his horse and rushed to the spot where the scout had fallen. The middle-aged scout, whose name Yang Xianxia knew, was already dead. Yang Huchen, who had arrived earlier, held the scout's warm body and clenched his teeth. Just as he was about to report the situation, Yang Xianxia waved his hand. Yang Huchen knew the severity of the situation, so he ordered someone to carry the body away. He then rode side by side with his father. When they came to a secluded area, Yang Huchen's face darkened, and he said with a deep voice, "Father, only one of the 6 scouts who went to Baiao Army Town has returned. The Chu's flag have been erected on the city wall and 3 trenches. They have done their best. What I'm afraid is that this group of West Chu remnants will place all their cavalry near Baiao in one breath." Yang Xianxia sneered, "Of course not. Baiao can only place 3,000 cavalry. Any more, and they can only put on a show. 3,000 cavalry plus 6 to 7,000 rebels in the city. They can defend the city, but if they take the initiative to attack, their brains will be kicked by a donkey. What I'm afraid of now is that they have their eyes on the supply line behind us. After the Qinshui River crossing, there will be another Qingyang Basin." Yang Huchen asked cautiously, "Father, should we retreat to the north bank of the Qinshui River crossing? With the river as a barrier, even if the enemy has the advantage of cavalry, they will not be able to use it. Whether we attack or defend, we still have the initiative. At most, we will just lose the first merit." Yang Xianxia's face was as calm as water, but he did not say anything. At this time, a new group of scouts came back with military intelligence. They brought back a piece of news that made Yang Xianxia and Yang Huchen, father and son, feel was absurd. Outside Baiao's strategic town, 2,000 light cavalry had begun to advance northward at high speed. Very soon, they would collide head-on with them. The speed of Ji Nan's infantry moving southward was moderate. They could not be said to be advancing step by step, but they were not flustered when facing all kinds of enemy attacks. They were far from being an exhausted army. Furthermore, under Yang Xinxing's command, there were also 4,000 light cavalry that had been honing their strength for a long time. Yang Xinxing felt it was somewhat funny. Where did the enemy come from? Did they read too many military books and become stupid? Did they think that when facing the expeditionary infantry, as long as they had cavalry in their hands, they could wantonly pounce on them? Yang Xinxing smiled and ordered, "Huchen, let Wenqi be the vanguard and lead 2,000 cavalry. You personally lead 3,000 cavalry behind. If our 3,000 cavalry take the initiative to ask for orders, you might as well agree and let them pick up the merit. It's also good to see some blood. When they return to the capital, they can boast about it to their gang of friends. Also, let people pay attention to the movements in Xinjiang Basin. These hotheads from West Chu who have been reading military books for more than 10 years may do something that makes people not know whether to laugh or cry." Yang Huchen took the order and left. Yang Xinxing rode the horse forward slowly and then climbed up a hastily built simple watchtower. The old general held the rough railing and was somewhat emotional. In the spring and autumn war, when two armies faced each other, the time, place, and people were advantageous. He had once fought side by side with several people from Bailiang, which was really pleasing to the eye. Yuan Zuozong's cavalry charge. Even though they were inferior in number, in the eyes of the onlookers, they still had the momentum of a lion hunting a rabbit. Chu Lushan brought up the rear to block. No matter how many tens of thousands of people were chasing after him, this fat pig would never make people feel worried. As for Chun Jibao's army, he gave hundreds of precise orders in a battle. Every commandant in every camp was like an arm to him. The reason why the current emperor only had eyes for this little butcher was because it was Chun Jibao who had won the absolute victory against Yi Baikue in the spring and autumn war in a battle of more than 100,000 soldiers. Moreover, he won without any hesitation, which was called clean and neat. Yang Xinxing sighed. How could the old man not know the surname of the greatest hero of the spring and autumn war? It was just that the cripple won on the battlefield and lost in the court. He could not blame others. Chapter 1161. Yang Xinxing made a sound of surprise. After the two cavalry armies with roughly the same number of people each broke into their own formation, the other side did not collapse like a landslide under Wenqi's charge. They still had the strength to fight. The old general was originally worried that this was the enemy's plan to lure them in. Wenqi was young and impetuous. If their cavalry suffered too many losses here, it would not be good. The old man laughed self-deprecatingly. After all, this is not the time when we fought West Chu. How could there be so many bloody battles to the death? Yang Xinxing quietly watched the situation on the battlefield. When the old man saw the elite cavalry that his son had secretly mocked as 3,000 cavalry charge out, he nodded. Huchen had released them to charge out at the right time. Wenqi and the enemy's losses were about 2 to 3. Firstly, Wenqi was not decisive enough when he had the advantage and could not immediately expand the results of the battle. Secondly, this batch of enemy cavalry should be the elite troops that West Chu had spent a lot of money to raise. They were trying to use a victory to boost the morale of the entire West Chu army. Yang Xinxing frowned. The 3,000 cavalry were charging with such a huge advantage, yet they were still so hesitant. In the old man's vision, the 3,000 cavalry were buried in a large pile of corpses. Their charging speed was clearly much slower. Their horsemanship was not good, but it was more likely that they were frightened by the sight of so many limbs and broken bones that were still alive a moment ago. In less than an hour, the clamorous cavalry had left behind more than 600 corpses. His grandson Yang Wenqi's cavalry had purposely opened up a path for them to pursue, while Yang Huchen continued to advance at a constant speed. After the initial discomfort of the 3,000 cavalrymen, their fathers were, after all, meritorious generals who had survived the battlefield. Only a generation had passed, and it was far from being completely diluted. The 3,000 cavalrymen were all descendants of generals, and under the careful protection of their personal squires, everyone fought to be the first. Yang Xinxing smiled and said softly, "At least there's a little bit of the bravery of your fathers and ancestors fighting for their lives on the battlefield." Yang Xinxing held the guardrail, and his expression suddenly changed. The earth trembled. This was not the small-scale trembling that the Jinan light cavalry brought. It was the armored cavalry, the real heavy cavalry. It wasn't that Yang Xinxing didn't covet the kind of heavy cavalry that could intimidate people just by looking at them. It was just that she didn't have a big horse that could carry heavy loads, and she didn't have enough money to support and maintain it. Moreover, there were no real plains in her territory that she could gallop on. If she lacked one of the three, she could only dream about it. Owning a troop of over 1,000 heavy cavalry was an obsession that almost every cavalry general with real power couldn't give up. Yang Xinxing's face darkened. "Do you really think my Jinan soldiers are made of paper if you don't join the Dongyu Plains?" A black torrent appeared in his field of vision. Yang Xinxing heaved a sigh of relief. Although it seemed like an irresistible force, it was only 1,000 or so cavalry. It wouldn't affect the overall situation. Both of them were fresh and full of stamina. Now, it would be a battle to see who was stronger between Hu Qin's 3,000 light cavalry and the enemy's 1,000 heavy cavalry. The young General Yang Wenqi naturally sensed the enemy's heavy cavalry entering the formation earlier than his grandfather Yang Xinxing. He shook off the blood on the tip of his spear. He didn't recklessly form a formation to stop them. Instead, he sent someone to order the 3,000 cavalry who were lying on the back of their horses to immediately retreat. Furthermore, they must not turn around and retreat. They must make a path for his father Yang Huqin's 3,000 light cavalry. Of course, at the same time, it was also convenient for the enemy's heavy cavalry to charge forward. However, he chose the lesser of two evils. It was better than having his 3,000 cavalry trapped in middle. Not only would they be killed by the heavy cavalry, they would also have to obstruct the charge of his father's 3,000 cavalry. When that time came, his own 6,000 men would be in a mess. How could they withstand the huge charge of the enemy's red armored cavalry? Yang Wenqi looked at the hedonistic sons who were busy stabbing the enemy's light cavalry off their horses with their spears. Some of them even laughed loudly and purposely poked the air with their spears, teasing the enemy soldiers who were dodging under their horses. Yang Wenqi was furious. He quickly rode forward and lightly stabbed the armor of a son of an aristocratic family with his spear. He shouted angrily, "Raise your head and look ahead. If you don't want to die, then retreat according to my orders." Fortunately, the 1,000 heavy cavalry charging out could not chase after the 5,000 cavalry scattered on the battlefield. Under the protection of Yang Wenqi's light cavalry and the retainers of the aristocratic families, the majority of them successfully retreated. However, there were still several hundred young masters who were charging at the front who were slightly dazed. When they came to their senses, they only turned around and fled in a straight line, leaving the 1,000 heavy cavalry with a swagger behind them. Yang Wenqi's eyes were red. He saw several familiar figures among the several hundred cavalry. These people were all from Great Peace City who lived in the mansions of marquises and dukes. Yang Wenqi gritted his teeth and had the old soldiers who had fought with his grandfather lead the 300 personal cavalry to save those bastards. Yang Wenqi retreated in an arc, tears streaming down his face. He could not bear to look at the scene behind him. Yang Huqin rode at the front and shouted angrily, "Kill!" Yang Xinxing's eyes widened. His hands holding the railing could not stop trembling, his veins bulging. As the 1,000 heavy cavalry came out of the water, another 1,000 light cavalry charged out from the left and right flanks. Yang Xinxing was not an immortal, so he could not change the situation of the battle. Without needing him to say anything, the old soldiers of Shaoji County started to form a defensive formation under the lead of their captains. A group of light cavalry of aristocratic families barely dodged the impact of the charging heavy cavalry. When they were retreating crazily from a different route, they still could not catch up with the black tide. They could only watch the heavy cavalry from the side as they kept leaping over their shoulders. The heavy cavalry was fully equipped with armors and carried only a spear. Their expressions could not be seen. Other than the muffled sound of horse hooves, there was no sound at all. Then, from the side of the battlefield, they saw countless South G County cavalries being knocked away by the heavy cavalry. Many of them were knocked away together with their horses. There were even 2 old soldiers of Yang clan who were pierced through by a spear, and their spears only created some sparks on the armor of the enemy cavalries before they slid away. Only those who were lucky enough to pierce through the gap of the bright red vest with their spears were able to knock the enemy off their horses. However, for those enemies who were destined to fall off their horses, their spears were still able to easily pierce through the South G County cavalries in front of them, as if they were tofu. Looking from afar, rows of corpses that were killed on the back of the horses were brazenly knocked away, fell to the ground, and then were trampled into a pile of meat paste. Xianxia's face was filled with disbelief. He widened his eyes and wondered why his side did not even have the strength to fight back. How difficult was it to train a heavy cavalry that was not a burden on the battlefield, but could decide the outcome with a single strike? Xianxia was extremely furious. Half of it was because of the surprise brought to him, the general of a kingdom by the remnants of West Chu, and the other half was because the enemy had underestimated them when they chose to use the old soldiers of South G County as their breakthrough point. Chapter 1162. Because it was more than 5,000 words, it was a bit late. After the summer of the first year of Xiangfu, there was a piece of news that shook the court. The great general in country, Xianxia, faced an enemy of less than 10,000 people. The 40,000 Nin elite soldiers were defeated again and again. First, he lost almost half of his cavalry and retreated to Qingyang Basin. Being attacked from the front and back, his cavalry was completely wiped out. After this battle, Xianxia, who had lost his integrity in his old age, became a rat on the street. In Greaton City, other than the Ministry of War that Liu Baijia was in charge of, the other 5 ministries and 2 imperial censors all started wave after wave of accusations against the old general. They all had reason and evidence, saying that he had ignored the orders of the main general, Liu Xianxia, and had gone south without permission. After going south, they revealed that this person was old. Not only did he not have a good command of the troops, he was also muddle-headed in the direction of the troops. Facing the remaining forces of West Chu, he was reduced to a state where he could not even take a single blow. Where was the invincible Li Yang? Where was the prestige of the nation? Xianxia did not have the time to care about the unrest in the court. The old general and his 40,000 Nin infantrymen that were still intact had become a turtle in a jar. Even he felt it was absurd and laughable. No matter how the white-haired great general tried to hide it, he still showed an aged appearance. The eldest son, Yang Huchen, had survived the cavalry battle more than a decade ago, but had lost an arm. His grandson, Yang Wenqi, had also been heavily injured in the battle 6 days ago. Even now, he was still lying on his sickbed with the stench of medicine. Xianxia had never fought such a humiliating battle. It was not a big deal that Huchen's 3,000 light cavalry could not win against the 1,000 heavy cavalry. Victory and defeat were common in the military. It was Xianxia who had let down his guard and violated the taboo of the military. The old man did not have many complaints. However, the development of the situation made General Ngua almost kill someone. The 3,000 soldiers who did not suffer too many casualties in the first cavalry battle actually requested to leave the army immediately after witnessing the power of the heavy cavalry's charge. They passed through Qingyang Basin and retreated to the north of Qinshui and Jindu. Xianxia did not reject them. He only suggested that they slowly retreated with the infantry to prevent the enemy's light cavalry from launching an attack. Unexpectedly, after receiving the news, those bastards agreed to it verbally, brought their personal guards and retainers, and fled to the north in the middle of the night. After receiving the news, Xianxia had no choice but to move his camp and follow them to the north. He also ordered his grandson, Yang Wenqi, to dispatch almost all the cavalry to escort them. Xianxia could only hope that the main general of West Chu who was in charge of the Eastern battle, could not seize the opportunity to separate their infantry and cavalry. He did not even hesitate to have the vanguard pretend to be attacking Biao's army. However, in the early morning of the second day, his grandson, who was covered in blood, only brought back a few hundred Southern Ji cavalry. The 3,000-plus chief culprits, his grandfather's soldiers, were safe and sound. Xianxia, who had a large piece of flesh cut off from his shoulder, wept silently. He said that the enemy's light cavalry were very good at night battles. They had split into several groups, and not only did they attack their hastily prepared Southern Ji cavalry, they even purposely drove the 3,000 cavalry, who could not even be considered as useless, southward to disrupt their formation. Xianxia's cavalry could only form a battalion of 300 men and sent them to their deaths in batches. Only then did they manage to protect the 2,800 men who deserved to die but could not die. After his grandson fainted, Xianxia interrogated a few lieutenant commanders who were defeated and turned back. The old general was getting more and more terrified. According to them, not only were the enemy cavalry good at ambushing at night, they were also skilled in archery. They could even imitate the hunting tactics of Beimeng barbarians in the outer perimeter. They did not get close to the enemy, nor did they stay far away. They always maintained a distance of 2 arrows, charging forward with 1 arrow, shooting out a rain of arrows, and then retreating. This kind of wandering tactic that lacked cohesion was not invulnerable. If his grandson, Xianxia, had just left the 3,000 cavalrymen behind, he would not have had to pay such a huge and bloody price. After that, there were no more movements from Xianxia's side. Only small groups of cavalrymen were wandering far away from the encirclement leisurely, shooting down the scouts who tried to send out military intelligence. Once Xianxia showed any signs of movement, the enemy would quickly mobilize their cavalrymen and gather them at the green rice basin at the back. There were also 1,000 cavalrymen waiting in the distance, ready to charge forward. It was at that moment that Xianxia finally realized that the enemy commander had never thought of competing with the Southern Ji infantry. Instead, he had predicted the mentality of Xianxia and the 3,000 cavalrymen with a special identity. First, he lured the Yang cavalry to attack, which would weaken their morale. Right from the beginning, he used the heavy cavalrymen to scare the wits of those profligate sons. He guessed that these bastards would disregard the overall situation and flee for their lives, and that the Southern Ji cavalry would be forced to escort them. Then he cut the flesh with a blunt knife and devoured the cavalrymen bit by bit. It could be said that Xianxia had a whole new level of respect for the strength of the enemy. However, as a veteran of hundreds of battles, the old general had no fear in his heart. He had lost because Xianxia had to take 2 risks in a row. The first time, he purposely gave them a military merit, and the second time, he wanted to save their lives. In the end, the price he had to pay was the death of the few thousand cavalrymen of Southern Ji cavalry. After all, the old soldiers of Southern Ji were brought up by Xianxia himself. Even though they had suffered such a crushing defeat, the old soldiers of Southern Ji were, after all, the soldiers under Xianxia's tutelage. They didn't cry and wail. Instead, they quietly set up their tents in an orderly manner at a place where the river was dense and the water was abundant. They dug out 3 trenches, and behind the trenches was a 20 feet tall protective dam. Between the wide trenches, which were about the height of 2 men, they tried their best to cut off a large amount of tough tree trunks and branches, sharpen them, and nailed them to the bottom. The tips of the trees, which had been roasted with fire, were arranged in a straight line, interweaving and connecting with each other. The soil inside and outside the trenches were all compacted. One after another, sturdy watchtowers rose from the ground, and tents were erected. The army of Southern Ji had an ample amount of provisions, so they didn't have to rely heavily on the supply line behind them. Besides, the cavalrymen of Liang dynasty, especially at the end of spring and autumn, with the support of the unobstructed post-house routes, the first class of elite soldiers could travel a distance of 100 miles in half a day. Also, when it was purely light cavalry, they could reach a speed that made people speechless. Lu Xingxiang's elite cavalrymen were said to be able to travel a distance of 300 miles in a day. It was even faster than Chu Lushan's 1,000 cavalrymen in the past. However, the latter was traveling on the Shu Road after all. As for the post-house cavalrymen, they were not included in the list. Regardless of how many post-house stations were reduced in Liang Dynasty due to the complaints of those civil officials who were desperately complaining about being poor, the post-house routes in the southern region of Jingji were still unobstructed. This was the source of Yang Xinxing's confidence. All he had to do was to wait for the reinforcements. Before that, they would not be besieged to death, and there was no need for Southern Ji army to act in desperation. However, Yang Xinxing was still exhausted, and his mind was even more haggard than when he was fighting on the battlefield. In order to appease those sons of wealthy families in the capital who were hiding and crying for their parents, the old general, who had already suffered a great loss in the war, did not even dare to speak harshly. He knew the reason why the assistant minister of war, Lu Xingxiang, had so little military power in his hands. It was because those old civil officials in the capital had been secretly hindering him. When an army was sent to war, it was not something that could be settled by just one general or even one ministry of war. If the Ministry of Revenue wanted to delay the march, they could find dozens of excuses to delay the march, and no one could find a reason to refute them. The fathers of 1,000 sons of wealthy families in the capital had joined hands and created a mess in the imperial court of Liang Dynasty, making it impossible for Lu Xingxiang to quickly control the entire army. However, after he learned about the battle in Xinjiang Basin and learned that his sons and grandsons were trapped, he was able to help the fate of the 6 divisions become extremely smooth overnight. The reason why Yang Xinxing had brought along the cavalry army, which looked like a golden jade on the outside, but was actually rotten on the inside, was because the old general knew better than anyone else that the imperial court of Liang Dynasty was a needle hidden in silk floss. However, Yang Xinxing did not expect the enemy's main general to be so insidious and ruthless. As Yang Xinxing expected, in the imperial court of Taiyan City, although countless people were denouncing Yang Xinxing for his crimes, the Minister of War, Liu Baijie, who had not been able to say anything during this period of time, suddenly seemed to be a man of his word. Those officials who had previously felt that Yang Xinxing's 40,000 and Yin Jinchuan's 30,000 and 70,000 men and horses were making a big fuss over a minor issue, and that it was equivalent to killing a chicken with a butcher's knife, changed their faces overnight. They all spoke in unison about the craftiness of the remnants of West Shu, and that they were preparing to fight to the death with the imperial army on the front line north of Qiaohuai. They needed to send another veteran general with meritorious service to the battlefield. Lu Xingxiang, as the commander-in-chief, he had allowed Yang Xinxing's troops to be besieged. This was an extreme oversight. He was not punished only because it was not appropriate to change the commander-in-chief at the last minute. Liu Baijie's suggestion was drowned out by the ferocious discussion in the imperial court. Lu Xingxiang needed to atone for his crimes through meritorious service. Other than the title of commander-in-chief, in reality, he did not have many troops that could be used for meritorious service. The one who truly led the troops was still the veteran General Wu Jun, who used troops steadily. This time, he had mobilized the 30,000 elite soldiers of the Jingji Fifth Army. Furthermore, under a secret order from the Ministry of War, Yin Jinchuan had marched down from the Dongyu Plains and finally stopped in the area of the scattered warehouses. Then, he would turn to the east and assume the position of a large army pressing down on the border from a commanding position. This was to support Wu Jun's 30,000 troops. When the time came, whether Yin Jinchuan's cavalry would attack or defend would still depend on the orders from the Ministry of War. Chapter 1163. Outside Yulu Pass, Lu Xianxia was still oblivious to the mobilization of troops from Guangling Road in the south. However, the criticism from the capital in the north kept entering his tent, creating a bleak atmosphere of instability. The few officers and commandants who were originally diligent and courteous at Yulu Pass were nowhere to be seen these days. Lu Xingxiang sat on the grass outside the camp. Beside him was Guo Dongfeng, who had been feeding the horses recently. Guodongfeng said angrily. Does this Tang Shi sort of mortal eat shit? He has already become the minister of war, yet his words are worse than a fart. Lu Xianxia said calmly, Lu Baijie still has some conscience. He even spoke a few words of justice for me and suggested that I lead the troops down south. Guodongfeng sneered. Conscience? Then why didn't he put in a good word for that old fool Yang Xinxing? The 6,000 cavalry that he had painstakingly accumulated for more than 10 years were sent to their deaths in less than 10 days because of those hedonistic sons of rich parents. In the end, he didn't even have a good ending. Lu Xianxiang smiled faintly and said, Lu Baijie isn't stupid, and the people who curse in the imperial court aren't really stupid either. There are many things that you know are one thing, but when you say it out loud, it's another thing. As long as Lu Baijie wants to stabilize his position, he has no choice but to work hard without complaint, robbing Peter to pay Paul. If Gu Jiantang was in the Ministry of War, this would not be the case. Of course, if Great General Gu is in Great Peace City now, there will be no day for me, Lu Xianxiang, to shine. Guodongfeng snorted coldly. West Chu's main general must have water in his head. He treated the front line of the Bai-Ao army as a battlefield to compete in military strength. Did he really think that everything would be fine after eating Yang Xinxing's 40,000 Southern Ji soldiers? Lu Xianxiang glanced at Guodongfeng. The civil officials in the imperial court are stupid. So are you? Guodongfeng was stunned. He said with a shocked expression, Did West Chu really plan to eat Yan Jinchuan's 30,000 cavalry from the beginning? Can they? Yan Jinchuan is not Yang Xinxing. Are they not afraid of choking to death? Could it be that Chao Chongqing is going to personally take action? Lu Xianxiang looked into the distance and said with a cold smile, You better open your eyes wide and watch carefully. I have a feeling that in this battle, a few young people will emerge from West Chu who will become your mortal enemies. Guodongfeng chuckled. That's a good feeling. 30 li north of the scattered warehouse, Yan Jinchuan's 30,000 cavalry deliberately slowed down as they went south. The scouts reported that there was an enemy army 5 li away. All of them were light cavalry, no less than 20,000 cavalry. Vast plains, vast battlefields. The autumn wind whistled, and the banners fluttered. The usually stoic old general, Yin, raised his head to look at the bright red Yin character on the flag, then turned back to look at the fearless Yin family members. The old man said in a deep voice, Pull out the flag. Old General Yan Jinchuan, who was supposed to be in the rear, was going to lead the charge. Immediately, a few of his trusted generals came out to stop him. Yan Jinchuan held up the long spear that had accompanied him for many years, shook his head, and said, If we win, it will most likely be the last battle of our lives. We can't just stand here and watch. If we lose, it will be our last battle. How can we die on the run? The moment Yan Jinchuan said this, the generals were speechless. The army pressed forward, and the banners moved forward. The enemy's 20,000 light cavalry did the same. Yan Jinchuan led 30,000 against the wind, while West Chu led 20,000 against the wind. There was no advantageous slope under the hooves of both sides, and there were no infantry formations. The territory here was vast enough for a sufficiently wide front line and cavalry to be deployed in batches. Thus, it could be said that the commanding talents of the cavalry commanders on both sides could be perfectly displayed, and the combat strength of the cavalry could be perfectly reflected. This was a perfect battlefield to see who was weak and who lost, and who retreated and who died. There was no chance of luck. Almost at the same time, 2 bugles suddenly sounded out, resonating with each other, majestic and sorrowful. Exactly the same, after the first row of cavalry from both sides charged out, the second row immediately launched a ferocious charge. The spacing between each row of war horses was almost the same, so it did not affect the charging speed of the cavalry at the back. The horizontal front lines of both sides were about the same length, but because Yan Jinchuan's cavalry had the advantage in numbers, they had more depth. A number of cavalry suddenly appeared in the distance between the two armies. The few of them did not affect the overall situation, and the men and horses did not wear armor. Among them was a young man who had followed Pei Sui to the peak of Luo Hu Hill, Xianxia. It was also this nameless West Shu commoner who had the guts to point out the situation in front of Chao Chongqing and Sun Shiji. Chao Chongqing laughed and called him half-Xia. This young man summarized the entire plan of West Shu's revival into getting beaten up and beating people up. In reality, the entire Northern Front matter was decided by Xianxia. From a UAO army taking over the town at the last moment, to the bait and night attack, to the encirclement and not attacking, to the Liang Imperial Court to lead Yan Jinchuan's cavalry to scatter. Until now, he was watching from afar. It was all because of this person's strategy. A middle-aged man who was a head taller than Xianxia on horseback asked in a deep voice, "General Xia, do we really not need to immediately use the 3,000 heavy cavalry hidden behind? Do we really not need to give the order for them to wear armor and mount? Yan Jinchuan's 30,000 cavalry are not soft persimmons." Xianxia pursed his lips and shook his head. There is no meaning in using the heavy cavalry too quickly or too slowly. Xianxia spat out a mouthful of turbid air and said slowly, "Moreover, the death of 2 light cavalry soldiers is still worth it compared to the death of 1 heavy cavalry soldier. It can even be said that unless the 3,000 heavy cavalry is used to win, if they know that the heavy cavalry cannot change the situation, then the 20,000 light cavalry can be used to scatter the spirit of Yan Jinchuan's cavalry, and this battle can be considered over. Otherwise, I would rather not have a single light cavalry left and retreat with the heavy cavalry to deal with the next cavalry battle." The man glanced at this young commander, who was definitely not famous in the Liang court, and laughed. This person was born in the place where the founding emperor of the Chu dynasty rose. That place once had the reputation of 4 marquises in 10 li. After Taizu of Chu became emperor, there were more than 160 generals and marquises. That place had as many as 46 of them. There was the custom of every family sewing cloth to make a marquee tiger for their newborns. It was the beautiful hope of the old saying, although a tiger cub has not formed a pattern, it has the aura of a bull. However, this young man named Xianxia was definitely not one of those descendants of generals and marquises with illustrious military achievements. However, this did not matter, because he was Chao Chongqing's only disciple. Xianxia coldly watched the situation of the battle from the side. An hour later, 2 hours later, the muscular man and several other men at his side were all covered in sweat. Xianxia raised his butt and craned his neck to take a few glances. His lips moved slightly as he muttered to himself. He was still waiting. The men who had participated in the spring and autumn war all began to have anxious expressions. On the battlefield, their side had lost 5,000 cavalry, and Yan Jinchuan had also lost more than 6,000. This was a battlefield where no one had retreated, and neither side had been defeated. Compared to the total number, such a large number of deaths, and the fact that they were still fighting to the death, was simply shocking. This was because in battles where cavalry were in a stalemate, the true casualties would often occur when one side was defeated and retreated. At that time, the number of casualties would truly increase. The brawny man who was drenched in sweat pulled at his collar and punched the horse's back heavily. Xianxia was still expressionless. The muscular man glanced at the sky and softly said, "General Xia, if you trade life for life, we will lose." Xianxia grunted softly, still unmoved. Another man said angrily, "I will mobilize the cavalry to rush to the front. I am not as cold-hearted as you, Xianxia." Xianxia acknowledged and said calmly, "Wei Hong, if you dare to go, I will dare to kill you." The man gritted his teeth and said, "With your mediocre skills?" Not far away, a handsome young man with 4 long swords on his back hesitated for a while and said coldly, "I, Lu Sichu, can kill you." The man roared, "Lu Sichu, don't think that I am afraid of you, just because your grandfather is Lu Dantian." Xianxia said indifferently, "I have said it before. Either Yan Jinchuan dies in battle, or the Yan family's cavalry is mostly exhausted. Only then will it be time for us to fight. You can ignore the fact that Lu Dantian is the #1 swordsman in Chu, but since you are a soldier of my army, you have to listen to military orders. If you want to die, I will not stop you. But please, Wei Hong, die on the battlefield in the future under the hooves of the Liyang cavalry. The ferocious-looking man rubbed his face and spat out a mouthful of saliva. If we lose this battle, I will beat you to death with my own hands, even if I have to disobey orders. After an hour that felt extremely long, Xianxia said in a deep voice, Lu Tsong, Wei Hong, listen to orders. Wei Hong cursed and turned his horse around like a madman. Listen to your mother's orders. I will go kill the enemy now. If we win, you can beat me to death later. The muscular man called Lu Tsong cupped his fists and left. Xianxia said word by word, remember, do not leave a single prisoner alive. Chapter 1164. Bailu was the 15th day of the 24 solar terms. At night, dew would appear on the vegetation and wild geese would fly south to avoid the cold. In Wuxia's county of Ningzhou, there were 2 county officers. At the end of last winter, Song Kelly, a foreigner, came here to take up the post. He was very effective in suppressing bandits and destroyed more than 10 horse gang nests. Horses in Ningzhou were frightened by his name. However, at the beginning of summer, Junior Commandant Song was removed from his position without warning by the Ningzhou provincial governor's office. He had been idle at home for several months now. When it rains, it pours. A marriage that had almost been settled was also canceled. The woman was a pretty girl from a small family in Wuxia's county. She was not from an official family or a scholarly family. Compared to the young Commandant Song, who had a bright future, she was of a higher social class. Compared to the young Commandant Song, who had a bright future, she was naturally wronged. The change in a marriage didn't cause too much of a stir in Weizhe County. After all, Ningzhou was in the south of the capital. Everyone in the county was focused on West Chu's revival on the Guangling Road. Who would care about the daily necessities of a poor scholar? Those who had a good relationship with their neighbors would call him Junior Commandant Song when they met. Most people did not like to pay attention to this official who had no backing. However, at dusk during Bailu, an old Confucian scholar with white hair entered the county. He did not ask for directions and went straight to Song Kelly's private residence, which had already been moved out of the county office. There was a small carriage parked outside the door so that people would not feel that the house was deserted. The old Confucian scholar looked at the delicate face in the corner of the curtain. The woman was surprised to see a guest in the house. She slowly lowered the curtain, and the carriage slowly drove out of the alley. The old Confucian scholar directly pushed the door and entered. Song Kelly was in the yard, reading an imperial court bulletin which he had asked for through his connections. When he saw the ordinary-looking Confucian scholar, he was pleasantly surprised. He put the bulletin on the stone table and hurriedly stood up. He bowed and said, "Greetings, Mr. Yuan." The visitor was the reclusive old Hanlin Yuan Pu from the Hanlin Academy. It was this Hanlin elder who had spoken with him that was better than 10 years of reading books. Song Kelly had to think about the words that Mr. Yuan had written on the rice paper almost every day. There are 3 things a scholar does not care about. He does not care about his family's cultivation. He does not care about his family when governing the country. He does not care about governing the country when governing the country. The rise of the country cannot be separated from the contribution of accumulation. Back then, the entire Great Peace City looked at the Song family as a joke. The 2 masters of the Song family who dominated the literary world were angered to death in bed, and his reputation was ruined. His father was exiled from the capital and could not be an official for the rest of his life. As for him, the young phoenix of the Song family, he was exiled to Wuxia's county of Ning province, a place with barren hills and treacherous waters. This was not a tragedy. After he had made some achievements on behalf of the people, first the high officials in the county government, then the Ning provincial governor's mansion, had all tried to suppress him. However, Song Kelly did not feel depressed about this. What really made Song Kelly feel confused was that the people who had received many favors from him in just half a year were now rolling their eyes and mocking him along with their colleagues in the county government. But Song Kelly did not want to complain to anyone except for Yuan Pu from the Yuan Huang sect. Because Song Kelly had a stomach full of inappropriate things, he wanted to consult this teacher who he had not been able to do well in the Hamlin Academy. After Teacher Yuan sat down, Song Kelly asked respectfully, "Teacher, why have you come to Wuxia's county?" Yuan Pu, who liked to write more than talk, picked up the court bulletin. Probably because he had read too much and his eyes were not good. He raised it higher and browsed through it carefully. After putting it down gently, he spoke vaguely, "I have not left Great Peace City for too many years, so I wanted to go out and take a look." Speaking of this, the old teacher said with some emotion, "After Wang Xinji left Martial Emperor City, an old friend of Great Peace City also left." Yuan Pu looked at Song Kelly and said straightforwardly, "There's a reason why the horse problem in Ningzhou can't be cured. It's just a chess piece on the chessboard. It's neither big nor small. But if you, an outsider, want to move the chess piece, the old chess players will kill you." Song Kelly nodded and said with relief, "As I expected, the horse gangs that have been swarming in Ning province these years are Chao Chongqing's pawns." Yuan Pu said indifferently, "Chao Chongqing has not been idle in the past 20 years. There is also a West Chu spy who became the third in command of Zhao Go. It was this person who proposed to plant spies in the army of Guangling province 17 years ago. In the early spring of the first year of the auspicious talisman, those spies who had been lurking for many years and had become lieutenants, to be exact 367 of them, half died suddenly, and the other half became the core of the West Chu rebel army. This move was completely unexpected by the Ministry of War, who had been plotting with Zhao Go for more than 10 years. The Minister of War, Liu Baijia, has a lot to do with this. Otherwise, how do you think West Chu has so many elites who can fight to the death on the battlefield?" Song Kelly was stunned. Yuan Pu wiped his 2 fingers across the stone table and said hoarsely, "There are big and small schemes. To put it in a big way, it is to remove the vassals, to gather the power of the country, to promote the imperial examination, to restrain the military. In the end, it is to swallow Beimang and unify the world. It is to complete the feat that the Qin dynasty has not accomplished in 800 years. To put it in a small way, it is to become someone's eternal emperor." Yuan Pu's finger moved vertically. "To put it in a small way, it is to force the king of Beiliang to use all his assets to contain Beimang. It is to limit Gu Jiantang to the northern front. This is an overt scheme, to use West Chu as bait to waste the power and ambition of the vassals, including the king of Guangling, to weaken the local military power of Gulu. It is also to use this to bait the king of Yanxi, Zhao Bing, who has the geographical advantage. This is a scheme. 2 generations of northern Liang princes. What's frightening about them is that they have 300,000 strong soldiers. What's respectable is that the father and son have power in their hands, but they won't rebel. What's pitiful is that regardless of whether you're northern Liang rebels or not, the imperial court of Liang wants your Su family to go bankrupt." Yuan Pu spread out his palms and wiped them on the table. "Life is helpless. Just like Su Xiao trying every means to kill me. But even if he has an army of 300,000 and groups of death warriors going to the capital, he still can't kill me. It is like Chao Chongqing, who is talented but unlucky to be born in West Chu. It is like Zhang Jiulu, who works hard for the good of the world, but has to face a situation where his family has the world. It is like Su Fengnian, who defeated Wang Xinji, but has to face the million cavalry of Beimang. Their helplessness, compared to you, Song Kelly, is it greater or lesser?" Song Kelly was dumbfounded. "Mr. Yuan?" Yuan Pu smiled. Song Kelly suddenly stood up and bowed deeply. He said anxiously, "Song Kelly greets Mr. Yuan." This bow was to the imperial tutor of Great Peace City, half-inch tongue, Yuan Bunshi. Yuan Bunshi ignored Song Kelly's seriousness and said calmly, "I shouldn't have met you so early, but I have spent my whole life in that city. In the early spring and autumn period, I was just a nobody. That Sun Ping's name is more useful than my saliva. At the end of spring and autumn, there is nothing for me to do. Now that the chess pieces have taken root, according to Huang Longshi's opinion, The interesting thing about farming is not to wait at home for a good harvest, but to see the gold in the fields with one's own eyes. Moreover, it's not appropriate for you to continue staying in Wuxia County. Why don't you come with me to watch the scene of war and war? Otherwise, we scholars will only talk about the hardships of the people, but in the end, we don't even understand the suffering of the common people. That would be too ridiculous. Song Kelly's eyes sparkled. He said joyfully, I am willing to be Mr. Yuan's lackey. Yuan Bunchi nodded and asked, I saw the woman in the alley just now. How do you think she compares to the princess who secretly left the capital just to see you? Song Kelly was speechless and did not know how to answer. One was a beautiful princess, the other was a pretty girl from a humble family. How could they be compared? Yuan Bunchi's eyes drifted. He sighed and said, when it comes to relationships between men and women, some people are good people and treat you well. This is a blessing, but it does not mean that they really like you. Some people have bad personalities, but are willing to change a lot for you, but they really like you. The woman surnamed Zhao is willing to risk leaving the capital to find you, but she will not abandon her family. When it is time to choose one of the two, she will leave you. But the woman surnamed Lu in the alley is gentle, but she will most likely do anything for you and will follow you to the end. People in the world always think that people with status will be grateful if they do something for them, but they're not deeply moved by the care of their parents, the help of their poor friends, or the help of their wives. Song Kelly said bitterly, thank you for your advice. Yuan Bunchi suddenly sat back on the stone bench. Talking is more tiring than doing things. Bring me wine. Song Kelly quickly ran into the house to find wine. Yuan Bunchi said to himself, if it were not for Bei Meng, with 300,000 Bailiang, what would West Chu do? What would Zhao Bing and Zhao Yi and the other princes do? Yuan Bunchi said self-deprecatingly, I am also helpless. Chapter 1165. A carriage leisurely drove towards the granary. The coachman was Song Kelly's delicate servant. Yuan Bunchi, who sat in the carriage, kept the curtain drawn and looked at the formation of geese in the sky, lost in thought. The bird that sticks out takes the brunt of the wind. But no matter if it was a family, a clan, or a country, there would definitely be someone who would stand out. After Song Kelly left Wuxia County, there were no more imperial court bulletins to read. However, Mr. Yuan would talk to him every once in a while, intentionally or unintentionally revealing the secrets of heaven. Song Kelly believed him without a doubt. The Battle of the Scattered Cavalry was the first great defeat the emperor had suffered in the territory south of Great Peace City after he ascended the throne. During the Yonghui era, they had gone to Nanzhao twice. Although they had returned without any achievements, they had won and lost several large and small battles. In the battle of the first year of Xianxia, the great general Yin had died in battle and 30,000 elite cavalry had been completely annihilated. There was no way to cover this up anymore. The Liang court was terrified. If it was said that Yang Xinxing being trapped could be understood as underestimating the enemy, then the Yin family's cavalry and the West Chu rebel army had met force without any tricks. The result was a crushing defeat, forcing the court officials to re-evaluate West Chu's strength. Song Kelly, who wholeheartedly served his country, was even more worried. It was only when Mr. Yuan spoke to him openly that this young phoenix of the Song family truly understood the treacherous nature of the imperial court. Did you see something? Yang Xinxing's 40,000 southern Ji soldiers, the 5,000 to 6,000 newly created cavalrymen, and Yin Jinchuan's 30,000 elite cavalrymen guarding the capital are all someone's army? Song Kelly exclaimed, but isn't the price a little too high? Yuan Bunchi smiled faintly. On the court side, it's mainly the Ministry of War and the study where the daily manager works. These places don't think that Yang Xinxing and Yin Jinchuan, the two veteran generals with meritorious service, will be defeated. They should have lost after the backbone of West Chu, Chao Chongqing, showed up. However, since the capital's military seems to have suffered a heavy blow, then what reason does Prince Guangling, Zhao Yi, have to not make any moves? Song Kelly sighed. First restraining the military, then removing the vassal state is a matter of course. This is an open conspiracy. Yuan Bunshi did not comment. He hesitated and said self-mockingly, "I've read some military books, but I don't dare to say that I'm familiar with military affairs. Therefore, I've always tried my best not to interfere in the layout of war. Of course, it's important to know one's own strengths and avoid one's weaknesses. Many times, as long as you don't make mistakes, opportunities will come." Yang Xinxing had lost because of the imperial court. Otherwise, with Zhu Zhao's frontline military strength, both sides were evenly matched. If Yang Xinxing was allowed to fight steadily, he would still be able to gain an advantage. However, Yang Xinxing had been fighting wars for most of her life. When she got older, she no longer thought of herself as a feudal official. Instead, she thought of herself as a courtier. In the end, it was reasonable that she lost outside of the battlefield. Song Kelly, you must learn from this. Song Kelly nodded vigorously. Yuan Bunshi continued. Yin Jinchuan was implicated by Yang Xinxing and had no choice but to retreat to the south. West Chu's cavalry waited for him to exhaust himself. Then, unexpectedly, 3,000 heavy cavalry appeared at the crucial moment to disrupt the situation. The more Yin Jinchuan managed his army and the more his soldiers fought to the end, the more they fell into West Chu's trap. With Yin Jinchuan's experience, he would have guessed that West Chu's 20,000 light cavalry had an ambush behind them. He just didn't expect that the 20,000 cavalry would be defeated by the 30,000 cavalry. The imperial court made one wrong step after another, while West Chu took one step after another. It seemed like West Chu had a successor. The Ministry of War had a record of several youths, and 4 of them were the best. 2 of the 4 had appeared. The Pei clan's Pei Sui was in charge of government affairs. This person was young and old, with a profound family background, but he was lacking in spirit. Xianxia, who led 20,000 light cavalry to fight to the death with Yin Jinchuan, was full of spirit. However, he couldn't grasp the timing of the heavy cavalry's attack. It seems that the northern front is the work of Ko Jianghuai, or Xiaxibian. Song Kelly said slowly, "I've heard of Ko Jianghuai. His ancestors were all generals of West Chu. He studied military strategy and was a brilliant figure in Xianxia Academy in his early years. He became teacher Jishang before he was 20 years old. He was also brave enough to break through enemy lines. He's a rare talent in both the pen and the sword. As for who Xiaxibian is, I've never heard of him. Teacher Yuan, is West Chu's Northern Front plan really not the Confucian sage Chao Changqing's plan?" Yuan Bunshi shook his head. Without these outstanding young people, how would Chao Changqing dare to revive his country? Yuan Bunshi suddenly laughed. It was the kind of laughter that wouldn't stop. Song Kelly was stunned. His impression of Teacher Yuan was that he was calm in the face of change. He had great wisdom, but he was shrewd and rarely revealed his true feelings. After laughing heartily, Yuan Bunshi took a sip of wine and said, "I've been cooped up in a Hamlin Academy all my life. I've heard a lot of famous scholars talk. Although I'm pedantic, I'm still one of the most knowledgeable people in the world. There's no lack of merit. I've either dealt with a group of people who can't see the light of day, or I've dealt with a group of people behind the scenes. These people are even more knowledgeable. Each of them has their own outstanding talents. Some of them are flawless in small details. Some of them have great foresight. When I left the capital this time, I stayed in those inns and towns and listened to the boasting of poor scholars and country bumpkins. Only then did I realize that there's a different flavor to it." Chapter 1166. Song Kelly didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he didn't dare to comment. During this trip to the south, he had heard many ridiculous comments from frogs at the bottom of the well. Song Kelly often heard them in one ear and out the other, but Mr. Yuan enjoyed them every time. He drank and ate more and more happily. For example, there were some rough people in the marketplace who said that Chao Changqing from West Chu was too stupid. Why didn't he hide in the capital and assassinate the emperor? He had already assassinated the emperor 3 times, so what if he did it a few more times? It was better than doing nothing on the Guangling Road. There were also people who had more practical opinions. They said that if he was Chao Changqing, he would lead the Jianghu masters to the north and kill a few thousand people each time, once every few days, all the way to the foot of Taiyan City without losing a single soldier from West Chu. It wasn't that there weren't any unique opinions. They raised objections. If that was the case, why didn't the imperial court spend a lot of money to hire martial arts experts to go to Beimei? Why do we still need General Gu Jiantang's border army? Why do we need the Bailiang cavalry? It was clear that there were rules in the world that the common people didn't understand. However, when these people were asked the root of the matter, they couldn't give an answer. In the marketplace, as West Chu rose up and raised the flag with the word Jiang, the situation of King Liang's army winning the battle did not appear. The battle was at a stalemate and was very lively. There were many people who were angry and expressed their opinions. Yuan Bunshi laughed softly and asked, "Do you think that the common people who are far away from the center of power are crude and short-sighted?" Song Kelly didn't hide his thoughts and nodded. "I do think so." Yuan Bunshi shook his head and said, "It's not that I haven't thought about reorganizing the forces in Jianghu. However, when the late emperor ordered Su Xiao to enter Jianghu, it made a bad start. Later, although the imperial court left many positions among the imperial Golden Saber Guard for the common people in Jianghu, and the Ministry of Justice and the Zhaogo Bureau gave out a lot of protective talismans and a considerable number of copper-embroidered cart bags, they paled in comparison to the Empress of Beimei. Although it was wishful thinking for the prideful top-notch martial artists to work together to assassinate someone at the cost of their lives, it was not difficult to reduce the number of casualties in a battle. But there were two things that caused me to completely give up on the idea. One was the orthodoxy of the literary vein in the emperor's heart, the obstruction of the eunuch Han Xianxia, and teacher Lu's attitude that he was the only one in Great Peace City. The second thing is that Su Xiao collected all the secret manuals in the world and put them in storage. He also set the rule of Jianghu. From then on, the court and Jianghu did not interfere with each other's business. He was unable to create the scene of Beimeng merging with the Great River. Yuan Bunshi sighed and shook the flagon. He looked at the young Song Kelly and said in a deep voice, "Smart people don't need to use complicated means to achieve great things. They're often very simple. But there is one thing that cannot be wrong. That is, what you see in the distance and the path you take must be right." What was truly difficult was that it was easy to know, but difficult to do. Your ancestors and father's generation had joined hands to dominate the literary world and suppress others. They might not have known that their actions were hindering the atmosphere of the scholarly circle. Why? Because they could not let go of their family's honor. The current emperor did not adopt Li Xiaoxin's new calendar. It might not be that he did not care about the people. Why? Because he could not let go of his family's prosperity. Chao Zhangqing's outstanding character, even I, Yuan Bunshi, admire him. This high-ranking official has entered the imperial palace several times. As long as his killing intent is not heavy, that old friend and I not only did not stop him, but also turn a blind eye twice. Why? Chao Changqing could not let go of one person. That old friend and I could not bear to let go of our scholarly prowess. It was scattered by the wind and rain early on. Yuan Bunshi said emotionally, "When a person is stubborn, they become foolish and true. The good and the bad cannot be described in a few words." Song Kelly was about to continue asking for advice when Yuan Bunshi had no intention of speaking. He muttered to himself, "The Jianghu has mostly been decided by people. The court will also have an end in this dynasty. In the future, I, Yuan Bunshi, and strategists like Li Yishan and Nalen Yusi will become extinct. As for the imperial tutor, that is even more of an extravagant hope." The following journey to the south was uneventful. General Yin Jinshuan and his 30,000 yen family cavalry were history. The imperial court was still deploying troops and generals. There would be no war in a short period of time. Moreover, the horse thieves had disappeared overnight. The carriage traveled without any danger. It even arrived at the battlefield where the granaries were scattered. Yuan Bunshi walked out of the carriage. He did not immediately go to the battlefield where the 50,000 cavalry had been deployed. Instead, he went to the place where the West Chu heavy cavalry had stopped. Liang only had Beiliang, Jizhou, and the two Liao provinces. West Chu's war horses were naturally inferior to those of these three places. Moreover, when the heavy cavalry rushed to the battlefield, it was impossible for them to gallop with the momentum of a rainbow. Instead, they needed a large number of mules and horses and many auxiliary soldiers. Before the heavy cavalry entered the battlefield, the riders did not wear armor or mount their horses. They only chose to hide in a place not far from the battlefield and quietly wait for an opportunity. Once the heavy armored cavalry completed their charge, the huge impact they would create would be unparalleled. It could be said that the heavy cavalry was like a woman that every cavalry commander wanted to keep in a golden house. They were the most terrifying love rivals that the enemy commander did not want to meet. Yuan Bunshi followed the marching route of the heavy cavalry and slowly walked until he reached the final battlefield. Yuan Bunshi squatted down and closed his eyes. It was as if he could see the tragic scenes of the battle between the cavalry and the soldiers. At the end of the light cavalry battle, the West Chu heavy cavalry charged out. Yin Jinchuan, who had changed his warhorse several times, was covered in blood. He was not afraid of death. He led the few remaining personal guards who had been protecting him and took the lead to meet the heavy cavalry. Those who had horses continued to fight on horseback and made one last charge. The Yin family cavalry, who no longer had any warhorses to ride, stepped into formation and met the unstoppable flood of armored soldiers. After the situation was settled, the exhausted West Chu cavalry continued to chase with gritted teeth. Yin Jinchuan was the first to die in battle. He did not even leave a complete corpse. His generals died soon after. Many of the Yin family cavalry who could no longer fight stared blankly at the spears on the backs of the enemy's horses or at the blades of the West Chu foot soldiers. Many blood-soaked flags fell on the battlefield. Some of the cavalry tried their best to grab a corner of the flag before they died. After the battle, the young commander of West Chu, who did not personally enter the battlefield, methodically ordered his auxiliary generals to deal with the funeral arrangements. The young man did not have the joy of becoming famous in one battle. He sat alone on the ground and looked around. He quietly lowered his head and raised his arm to wipe his tears. It was not only for the men of West Chu, but also for the Yin family cavalry of the enemy camp. Chapter 1167. Wudong's 81 mountain peaks were a spectacular sight, but not every peak had a Taoist temple, and not every mountain had a Taoist cultivator. Among them, the small pillar peak in the north had relied on the east wind of the northern Liang king's large-scale construction to build a new Taoist temple. The master of the temple was the old Taoist Song Jiming's youngest disciple, Han Gui. This young Taoist cultivates his heart, not his strength. Even the old sect leader Wang Zhongluo once said, "This child is upright and sincere. The further he goes in the future, the further he will go." However, even though Wudong's mountain style was simple and honest, Han Gui was neither proficient in alchemy nor talismans. Even his divination skills were sparse, so Song Jiming never allowed this disciple in closed-door training to open the peak. Of course, with the incense offerings of Wudong Mountain in the past, even if they wanted to, they were powerless. After Wang Zhongluo passed away, the sect leader was changed from Hong Shixiang to Li Yufu, but Han Gui still cultivated in a tepid manner. Green Mountain Taoist Temple was newly completed. After the initial celebration from the various Taoist temples, Han Gui was not a person who was good at extravagance. The remote Little Pillar Peak soon quieted down, and the number of pilgrims at Green Mountain Taoist Temple could be counted on one's fingers. However, there was a child who often came to Green Mountain Temple to play and became familiar with the boy who swept the path. Later, the child brought a young man to offer incense, who was said to be his master. The temple master, Han Gui, climbed the mountain at a young age and concentrated on studying the classics. He had always lived in seclusion and did not pay attention to worldly affairs. He also did not recognize the pilgrim who could not be considered extravagant. The third time the pilgrim entered the mountain to offer incense, Han Gui still did not recognize him. Instead, It was the disciple sweeping the floor who remembered the person's face and secretly reminded him in a low voice. Han Gui then hurriedly stepped over the threshold and called out to the handsome young master, saying that the Taoist temple was simple and crude, and that there was only crude tea to welcome guests. The handsome and resolute pilgrim did not refuse and agreed with a smile. Han Gui made good tea. The tea was wild tea from the mountain, but Han Gui's tea was not like those of the famous Jiangnan scholars who did not pay attention to the water used to make the tea. The two drank. The pilgrim who called himself Liangzhou's Su Qi did not say much, only praising the tea's profound taste. Han Gui did not know how to exchange pleasantries and could only laugh it off. While they were drinking tea, the child who came as Xiao Zhu peeked to play from time to time, and Han Gui's disciple, Xianxia, sat on the stone steps outside the main hall and chatted. Although Xianxia was young and had endless homework and work to do every day, his seniority in the Wudong Peaks was not low. The old chief Wang Zhongluo and the others had the highest seniority on the mountain, but with the passing of the oldest Song Jiming, only Chen Yao and Yu Xingrui were left. Next was the new chief Li Yufu's generation. Because the previous generation took in very few disciples, Han Gui, as one of Song Jiming's 6 disciples, had the same seniority as Li Yufu. Next was the Qing generation. There were about 40 people on Wudong Mountain. Although there were signs that the number was gradually increasing, if the little Taoist child Xianxia went to places like Lotus Peak and Jade Pearl Peak, where incense burned, many middle-aged Taoist priests might even call him martial uncle. The little Taoist child Xianxia wore a Dongxian scarf commonly seen in martial arts. There was an inch of cotton folded on top of the scarf, and auspicious clouds were drawn on the surface of the scarf. It hung down like a bamboo slip, inspired by the immortal Lu Zhu. At this moment, the little Taoist child was talking to his new peers about the art of nourishing one's health, which he did not fully understand. Today is the autumn equinox. My sect's ancient book, True Theory of Heavenly Essence Nourishment, has recorded that the thunder has stopped and the yin qi has gradually increased. My generation should lie down early and rise early. Moreover, my master said that the hot and dry autumn is also divided into warm and dry, cool and dry. We should climb high and look into the distance, diligently breathing in and out, knocking our teeth and swallowing. The art of nourishing one's health, in general, is the word restraint. Listening to the little Taoist child's genteel words, the other child babbled indifferently. However, he asked curiously, since there will be less thunder in the future, will there be more demons and ghosts? Then won't you Taoists be busy going down the mountain to get rid of demons and ghosts? Xianxia rolled his eyes. A chicken talking to a duck, he was a bit angry. The child who knew he had made a mistake scratched his head, not knowing what to do. In the end, Xianxia didn't bicker with this guy. Suddenly, he had a gluttonous look on his face. He even wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth and said in a low voice, "Dilong, let me tell you, there's a large persimmon forest on Little Lotus Peak. It's going to be completely red soon and very delicious. I've already discussed it with a few senior martial brothers and martial nephews on the other peaks. When are we going to pick persimmons? Do you want to go? If you want to go, I'll count you in." Dilong said in surprise, "Little Lotus Peak? Isn't that the place where your previous sect master, Immortal Hong, cultivated alone? You also dare to go steal persimmons?" Xianxia shrunk his neck and carefully glanced at his master. Then he lowered his voice and said, "Before young Marshal Granduncle ascended, it wasn't a problem for us to pick persimmons. Young Marshal Granduncle would even personally help us pick persimmons. Alas, it's a pity that after young Marshal Granduncle ascended, Marshal Granduncle Chun, who was in charge of discipline, didn't let people go there. Some time ago, for some reason, he even issued a ban on the mountain. However, the persimmons there are really very sweet and very delicious." At this point, the little Taoist's eyes suddenly turned red. He hurriedly raised his sleeve to wipe his eyes. Dilong laughed mischievously and said, "You want to eat persimmons and you want to cry? Can't you be a bit more mature? It's fine, I'll hurry and pick them for you tomorrow. I guarantee you'll have enough." The little Taoist glared at him. I just miss our young martial granduncle. On this side, there were persimmons and young martial granduncle. On the other side, Han Gui naturally knew what was going on. He sighed and was somewhat absent-minded. He still remembered when he chanced upon young martial uncle who rode and herded cows. Every time he saw juniors like them, if it was this season, he would always find a way to take out a few bright red persimmons from his sleeve. Before handing them over, he wouldn't forget to gently wipe them with his sleeve. Su Qi, or rather Su Fengyin, said softly, "Taoist Han, I know a little about geomancy. I also know that Little Pillar Peak's mountain terrain and water veins are dense. It's also one of the few blessed paradises in Wudong Mountain. Forgive me for asking, but why is there so little incense even though Green Mountain Monastery has been built?" Although Han Gui was not well-versed in the ways of the world, his Tao heart was clear. He immediately understood the meaning behind this person's words. He smiled and said, "Logically speaking, Little Pillar Peak's geomancy is indeed very good. It should have been handed over to an extremely talented eldest disciple of the Qing generation to establish a sect. However, young martial uncle probably joked with me back then, saying that Little Pillar Peak's osmanthus flowers were especially fragrant and topped all the other peaks. Since I have the word osmanthus in my name, I should have in my life. To be honest, without mentioning anything else, just the statues and tables in Green Mountain Monastery are all cast in copper and distilled in gold. It's not cheap. I'm not afraid of being laughed at by young Master Su, but I'm really afraid that the thief will remember it. When the time comes, I won't be able to stop him even if I try my best. Actually, as far as I'm concerned, studying anywhere is still studying and cultivating. After all, in one's life, one can only eat a few bowls of rice, wear a set of clothes, and sleep on a bed." Su Fengyin joked, "Taoist Han, as a cultivator, why would you care about those yellow and white things? Shouldn't it be that as long as it's a worldly possession, you shouldn't care about anything?" Han Gui laughed heartily and waved his hand. Wrong. Immortals are still half human. As for Zhenren, the emphasis is on the word Zhenren. Su Fengyin seemed to be unhappy. He frowned and said in a low voice, "Forgive my ignorance. I don't understand the meaning of this. I hope Taoist Han can enlighten me." Chapter 1168. Han Gui didn't care about young Master Su's gloomy expression. She smiled and said slowly, "Sleep, eat 3 meals with your eyes open, work hard and take care of your family. These are all a person's duties. They can't be ignored just because one's status is high. Although Taoists are people who leave the secular world, the road to immortality has a bleak future. When we cultivate, it's said to be the great way of immortality. Actually, in my eyes, we are cultivating a principle. For example, if a person is at home and looks after the things in the house, they won't be lost or damaged. If you're lodging, you should protect the things in the courtyard from being stolen or robbed. I'm a passerby of this Green Mountain Monastery and a lodging person in the secular world. If I can turn stone into gold, I won't feel heartache if I can compensate for the loss of the gilded statue. But I only know how to cultivate. I don't know how to make money. Since I can't compensate, I have to feel heartache." Su Fengyin smiled and said, "Taoist priest principle is very vulgar, but it's not bad." Han Gui smiled and said casually, "I have a vulgar idea. I want to become an immortal." Su Fengyin rubbed the edge of the porcelain cup with 2 fingers and said softly, "I've met a few people who can live forever but don't want to." Han Gui didn't think that this young master was exaggerating. She sighed sincerely and said, "It's a pity that I haven't left the mountain since I came up. I can't learn from my 2 martial uncles. If I have the chance in the future, I will definitely go down a mountain to take a look." Su Fengyin smiled and drank a big mouthful of tea, sweeping away the depression in his heart. He then asked Han Gui for a lot of knowledge about cultivation and health. The latter answered fluently and said everything she knew. She didn't hide anything. The sun was setting in the west, and the sky was gradually getting dark. The 2 children on the steps had already changed from sitting to squatting, then to standing, and then from standing to lying down. It couldn't be helped that their respective masters were so engrossed in their conversation that they didn't show any signs of stopping for a while. They were truly bored to death. Yu Dilong and Xianxia both began to doze off. Yu Dilong felt that waiting was not a solution, so he could only use a few dishes that he had tasted at the Qingliang Mountain Wang Fu to help the little Taoist relieve his tiredness. Some green radish and orange duck soup, some peach blossom braised mandarin fish. Xianxia didn't know what they tasted like, but just hearing them made her salivate. Su Fengnian glanced at the twilight in the courtyard and stood up apologetically. Sorry for disturbing you today and delaying your cultivation. Han Gui stood up and shook his head with a smile. It's all right, young Master Su. You can come to Green Mountain Monastery more often when you're free, especially when the winter bamboo shoots are out. Su Fengnian's reply was a bit of a killjoy. I most likely won't have a chance to come here in the short term. Han Gui was stunned and didn't know how to respond. Su Fengnian smiled. My family's collection of books is quite abundant. Later I'll have someone send some books to Green Mountain Monastery. Just treat it as borrowing them for Taoist. Han Gui made a sound of agreement. Yu Dilong saw that his master was finally going to return home. He jumped up and said with a smile, Let's go. Xianxia, I'll come and play with you later. The little Taoist hurriedly stood up and jogged down the steps. Together with his master, he saw young Master Su out of the monastery. Watching the two figures, one big and one small, gradually disappear into the distance, the little Taoist's face was full of reluctance. Master, what were you talking about with that young master? Young Master Su consulted Master about a scattered ancient text. It was broad and profound. Rather than saying that Master was dispelling his doubts, it would be better to say that young Master Su was teaching. It was like a Daoyin technique. Alas, if one really wanted to study it thoroughly, it would take at least 10 years, and at most a lifetime. It looks like there's no need to rush down the mountain. It's so hard to learn? Master, then don't learn it. There are so many books in the world. How can one understand all of them? This one is not the same. Master, then please don't teach me this one. If you have to read it for 10 years, then I won't be able to leave Mount Wudong for 100 years. I won't do it. After all, you just don't want to cook, right? Ha. Forget it. Today Master will do it personally, so that you don't know how to sprinkle salt. All right, remember that a cultivator can't be idle all day long and be an empty shell. Go while Master is cooking. Copy the 9 notes of obedience to life twice. Su Fengnian and Yu Dilong walked down the small pillar peak along the newly opened stone path. Yu Dilong couldn't help but ask, Master, do you really think there are ghosts and gods in this world? Su Fengnian casually said, If you believe it, then there are. If you don't, then there are none. The child made no sound. Looking at the dark mountain forest, he was somewhat uneasy. After being interrupted, Su Fengnian, who was originally thinking about something, glanced at the child who was following closely behind him. This eldest disciple's talent in martial arts was really amazing. Although Yu Dilong, whether it was out of his own heart or because of the poor environment he grew up in, had an almost flawless ability to hide his inadequacies from everyone, Yu Dilong's talent in martial arts was really amazing. Su Fengnian had once inadvertently confirmed one thing. As long as this child walked through any complex structure once, he would be able to outline a 3-dimensional picture for you. This kind of talent was even rarer and more precious than a simple retentive memory. The so-called martial arts genius was just like this. Su Fengnian had been watching from the sidelines for a long time. He realized that this disciple of his was a little warm-hearted and cold. Although he was very familiar with the little Taoist Xianxia, in Yu Dilong's heart, he had already drawn a clear line. He could not cross the line. He could not go against the dragon's scale. He could laugh and play around, but if he crossed the line, Su Fengnian could not guarantee that Yu Dilong would do something extreme. However, this was Su Fengnian's first time being someone's master. Although he didn't agree with the way Yu Dilong interacted with Wang Sheng, Lu Yinzhang, and the Taoist child, Xianxia, he didn't feel the need to force the child's temperament back. Su Fengnian thought for a moment and suddenly asked, Do you think that Lu Yinzhang looks very smart, but is actually very stupid? Yu Dilong opened his mouth wide as though he wanted to deny it. But looking at his master's clear eyes in the night, the child didn't say a word and lowered his head. Su Fengnian smiled and continued walking. He said softly, a master also has a master. Let me tell you a story that my master told. It's about his learning experience. Yu Dilong looked up at his master's back and bit his lips. Su Fengyin slowly said, "There's an allusion to the empty city strategy. It says that when two countries fought, one side's superior commander was scared off by the other side's empty city. After layers of embellishment, the former was reduced to a joke, while the latter was revered as an immortal. When my master read this when he was young, he also yearned for the latter strategy. When my master read this allusion again when he was young, he was puzzled. It was only an empty city. If he was the latter, he could have sent a small number of troops to act as suicide soldiers to investigate the situation inside the city. Since he could think of this, why couldn't the future great Feng emperor, who would usurp the throne in the future, understand? Therefore, my master had huge doubts about this allusion. He began to flip through many official and unofficial histories. He finally discovered the truth. The situation the latter was in at that time was that once he defeated the former and destroyed the enemy country, he would have achieved irreversible merit. His merit would be so great that it would shock the emperor to the extreme. He could only retire at home and retire for the rest of his life. After my master finished telling me this story, he told me that there are 3 realms in studying. It's the same for judging people. Dilong blurted out, "Master, I think that if the story is true, then the former is also very smart. The empty fort stratagem, in itself, is not clever. What is clever is that he used this stratagem to scare off the enemy. Both of them had a way out, and by the way, he won the respect of the future generations." Su Fengyin nodded and said, "That's what I told Master back then." Yu Dilong scratched his head. Su Fengyin smiled and squinted his eyes. He said, "But Master immediately slapped me on the head with a duster and scolded me. Being smart is superfluous and not beneficial. I used to feel wronged. Is it wrong to think that I'm smart?" Su Fengyin, with a gentle expression, continued, "Smart people should use their intelligence in the right place. Life between heaven and earth should be beneficial to the world. Even if you don't have the heart or the ability, you shouldn't bully others." Yu Dilong said softly, "Master, don't worry. Even if I learn profound martial arts, as long as people don't bully me, I will never bully others." Su Fengyin exhaled and said, "You need to have many friends, but not brothers. If you meet someone who can be your brother in the future, you must treat them sincerely. Master didn't do a good job. I hope he could do a better job in the future." Yu Dilong seemed to understand, but he still nodded. Chapter 1169. Wudong had several incense-worshipping paths in and out of the mountains. After leaving Shaozhu Peak, Su Fengyin and Yu Dilong were on their way to the main peak. At the deep ravine of Leigong Stream, they coincidentally met an acquaintance. The old Jinren Xianxia was leading a pair of master and servant up the northern divine path. Su Fengyin went up to ask and found out that the 2 foreigners admired Wudong's prosperity. After entering the mountain, they lingered and forgot to return. The further they went, the more remote they became. Fortunately, they met Xianxia. On the way out, the old Jinren and the middle-aged Confucian scholar talked happily. Fortunately, it was the 15th night of the full moon. Under the clear moonlight, the night road was not too bad. Su Fengyin was not in a hurry to return to the elephant washing pond. Together with Xianxia, he sent the pair of master and servant to the one-track-minded divine path. The Confucian scholar obviously did not know that Xianxia was the Jinren of Wudong Mountain. He only thought that Xianxia was an old Taoist from a poor Taoist temple. But seeing that this old Taoist was not ordinary, the Confucian scholar who claimed to be from a Gangnam-do family treated him with respect. With Su Fengyin's discerning eyes, he immediately saw through the clues. The scholar's clothes were simple, and the young man carrying a book did not show off his wealth and arrogance. But the jade pendant hanging from a young man's waist was not ordinary. It was in the shape of a reclining deer turning its head, outlined by a yin line, vivid and lifelike. It was truly a rare item that had been passed down for thousands of years. As for the bamboo bookcase, it was also shiny. It was obviously an item passed down from generation to generation. The so-called foundation of a rich and powerful family was reflected in these gentle details. Along the way, the middle-aged Confucian scholar asked Xianxia about scriptures such as Dao Shu Qi Zhan Zhang and Zhu Dong Zhen Jing Massage Daoyin Formula. Su Fengyin could see that although these scriptures were introductory Taoist classics, they were orthodox and mellow. They had been approved by the Taoist immortals of various dynasties and had detailed annotations. They were especially suitable for people who were busy with work to take a break from work. After Xianxia sent the master and servant to the main road, the two sides happily parted. The old Jinren stood side by side with Su Fengyin, watching the Jiangnan Confucian scholar who had traveled thousands of miles to Beiliang leave. He laughed softly and said, "Did Prince see anything?" Su Fengyin nodded and smiled. "It should be the Deer Song family of Gangnam-do. The accent matches, and the family history revealed by the words is also similar. Although the Song family is at the bottom of the 10 wealthy families of the spring and autumn period, a starving camel is still bigger than a horse. Furthermore, because the family's foundation is located north of the Guangling River and they have long been attached to the imperial court, they are not deeply involved with the other families. Now in Liang, they are considered a first-class noble Chinese family. Back then, the Song family of the capital had 2 teachers. Before they became famous, they had no choice but to use the banner of a distant branch of the Deer Song family to gain a firm foothold in Taiyan City. I heard that the Deer Song family has a lot of complaints about the Song family that burned the bridge after crossing the river." Xianxia twirled his beard and smiled. "If I'm not wrong, this person should be the youngest son of Deer Song Yeping, Song Dongming. Legend has it that before this child was born, an auspicious white deer rushed into the mansion, and Song Dongming was born." Su Fengyin did not expect Song Dongming to come to Beiliang personally. He frowned and said, "This person is one of the hidden ministers that someone in the imperial court has taken a fancy to. On the surface, after he lost to Yin Mao Chun in the spring of Yonghui, he has devoted himself to the mountains and rivers for many years. But in reality, he has been hibernating and accumulating power. Powerful families like the Song family have always liked to speculate everywhere. However, to put such an important person like Song Dongming in Beiliang seems to be too risky." Xianxia shook his head and turned to look at Su Fengyin face to face. He asked, "Your Highness, do you think that once Beimang invades the south, Beiliang will lose more than win?" Su Fengyin did not hide anything. He said calmly, "If the Empress of Beimang only uses half of the country's power and the Southern Dynasty's army to invade the south, I have full confidence that I can defend Beiliang's border. However, if the Empress of Beimang personally comes to the border with all of Beimang's military orders and generals, even if Beiliang already has 2 lines of defense, it will still be impossible to stop Beimang's iron hooves. To be honest, if it were not for Chun Jibao being conferred the title of King of Western Shu, allowing the Su family of Beiliang to build Western Shu and Nanzhao into the 3rd line of defense, we still have the confidence to stop Beimang from invading the south. According to my master, Li Yishan's plan, Beiliang's 200,000 border soldiers, Yuliang and Nanzhao, and finally Liuzhou's western regions and Western Shu's Nanzhao, would be enough to hold Beimang's million-strong army. However, the imperial court used Prince Zhao Kai to go to the western regions with a vase and Chun Jibao to be conferred the title of king to become a vassal, disrupting the situation that Beiliang painstakingly built up. Otherwise, with Shu's Nanzhao and Nanzhao's thousands of li of depth, even if they lost the border, they could still attack and defend. Not to mention 5 years. Even if Beimang was given 10 years, they still wouldn't be able to enter the Central Plains. Chapter 1170. Su Fengyin rarely confided in others, especially when it came to matters of national security. He would not take the initiative to mention even half a sentence to others. However, he had always been close to Mount Wudong, and Chunyao was a senior of virtue and prestige on the mountain. He was the shitty of the old hierarch Wang Zhonglo, and also Hong Shixiang's shitty, so Su Fengyin did not have the slightest bit of wariness. Moreover, a person with a treasure in his heart would always need to say a few words. The moon was bright, and the stars were sparse. Walking slowly on the divine path back to the mountain with Xianxia, Su Fengnian continued. Unfortunately, after Master passed away, I could not keep the plans he had set. When I defeated Wang Xianji, I had two choices. One was to go to Western Shu and kill Qin Jibao, who had ruined Bailiang's grand plan. Even if I had to bear the name of a rebel, I had to take Western Shu, which had always been easy to defend and difficult to attack. The other was to go to Mount Longhu and kill my enemy, Zhao Huangqiao. Out of selfishness, I still chose the latter. Although at that time I had a vague feeling that killing Zhao Huangqiao was easier than killing Qin Jibao, looking back now, in the end, it was still out of selfishness. Every time I think about it, I feel uneasy. Su Fengnian smiled, seeming a little embarrassed. He said softly, "Of course, the number of times I think about it is actually not many. Including now, it's only been 2 times." Xianxia smiled knowingly. My master once told us that cultivation is neither easy nor difficult. In fact, it's just being one's true self, speaking from the bottom of your heart, and doing things with love. In my opinion, cultivation is for the sake of attaining the Tao. There's nothing wrong with that. Everyone in the world is cultivating and making choices. That's why there's the saying, the unjust find little help, the righteous find much help. Since the prince is being frank and honest, this humble Taoist might as well speak his mind. If there is any disrespect, this humble Taoist believes that the prince will not vent his anger on Wudong Mountain. The prince's actions over the years are worthy of trust. This was common sense, and Bailiang was the same. His Highness oversaw the northwest of the dynasty, and together with the great general Gu Jiantang on the eastern front, he faced the Baimang Iron Cavalry. Regardless of whether he was a prince with a different surname, or if he was called the Second Emperor, this was the responsibility that the eldest son of the Su family should bear. He could not shirk his responsibility because of a few sarcastic remarks. Generations of Wudong people were willing to get close to the great General Su Shao. Other than the great general treating the Taoist priests on the mountain well, it was more because my fellow disciples respected the great general's responsibility. Your Highness is the new head of the Su family and the new Prince Liang of the dynasty. Wudong Mountain, where this humble Taoist is from, is generally satisfied. However, there is one thing that this humble Taoist cannot bear to look at. Today, this humble Taoist must let your Highness know. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Taoist priest, please say it. Good words enter the ear, bad words don't take to heart." Xianxia looked at the amiable young king and said seriously, Your Highness is too gloomy." Su Fengnian did not expect such a statement. For a moment, he was speechless and did not know whether to laugh or cry. The middle-aged Taoist priest said angrily, "Your Highness, after all, is only a young man in his early 20s. You are also a figure who has climbed to the top of Jianghu. You should be at your most high-spirited. How can you be so gloomy? Compared to this humble Taoist priest who has lived for more than 80 years. His mentality is even more gloomy. Hey, not to mention this humble Taoist priest. When this humble Taoist priest was at your age, he was not as arrogant as you. At that time, the 2 brothers, Zhao Shi and Zhao Shituan of Longhu Mountain, went up the mountain to ask for the Tao and ask for the sword. Senior brother Wang beat and scolded them until they had no temper. He also went down Wudong Mountain without his master's permission and went to Longhu Mountain alone. First, he vented the anger in his heart. After returning to the mountain, he was grounded by his master to reflect on his mistakes. That master of ours spoke harshly and got angry in front of eldest senior brother. After he locked eldest senior brother up, he immediately smiled at us. That mouth of his couldn't close for a few days. He smiled at everyone he saw. However, after master left, senior brother Wang's mind became heavy. It was not until he led junior brother Wang up the mountain that he felt better. Su Fengnian's hands were in his sleeves. He was silent, but there was some warmth in his heart. Xianxia suddenly smiled and said, "This humble Taoist priest knows a bit about prophecies. I have 2 pieces of good news to tell you. Consider it as my thanks to your Highness for returning the great Yellow Court." Su Fengnian said half-jokingly, If it's really good news, I promise that Xiaozhu Peak's incense will not lose to Wudong's main peak in 3 years. Even if Beimang really invades Beiliang's territory, I will protect Xiaozhu Peak. Qin Yao glared and said, "Let's not talk about the good news first. Your Highness, there is one thing you must remember. The more sincere a person is, the more careful they must be with their words. Isn't it a prophecy? When the ancient sages created words, the heavens wept. There's a great deal of care in this. Now that the Xiaoshi dynasty has chosen the Yu language as their official language, it is even more profound. This is all related to extremely complicated destiny." Su Fengyan nodded and did not argue. Qin Yao's expression softened. He smiled and said, "The first piece of good news is that there is a white flood dragon aura of benevolence coming north from the southern sea. The second piece of good news is that there is a black flood dragon aura coming west from the southern sea and entering Beiliang from the east." Su Fengyan thought for a while and said doubtfully, "The former should be a Qi cultivator from the southern sea Guanyin sect. The latter?" Qin Yao's expression was calm and did not reveal the heavenly secrets. Su Fengyan did not dare to believe it. He said to himself, "Is it really coming?" Qin Yao smiled and said, "With that song Dongming of the Confucians, Beiliang can be said to be gradually enlightened. Your Highness, do you still think that Beiliang will lose without a doubt? The fate of the world is fixed. First, the Liang imperial court committed suicide. Then, many people from Great Peace City quietly left. For the Xiaoshi, this is not a good sign. But for Beiliang, for your Highness, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You must not miss it." Yu Dilong looked at his master. An imposing aura. A python behind him raised its head. An imposing aura. Chapter 1171. The Southern Dynasty of Beimang had its imperial court. Even though the Norland had its capital, the empress would spend 2 seasons a year in the imperial tent. The imperial tent was located at the center of the empire. It was a moving city made up of countless tents of various sizes. The tent that the world's noblest old lady lived in was golden in color. Hence, it was like a giant golden spider crawling on a grassland, competing with the sun for glory. When this golden imperial tent appeared in Gusai Prefecture, the imperial court of the Southern Dynasty suddenly lost its splendor. A group of nobles and officials gathered around the imperial tent, quietly waiting for the emperor's summons. The venerables were closer to the imperial tent. For example, the new king of the Southern Dynasty, Dongzhuo, the Ruren cavalry commander, Hong Jingyan, the prefect of the 2 prefectures of Gusai and Longyao, and the great general of the Southern Dynasty, Lu Gui and Yang Yuanzhan. These influential figures in the Southern Dynasty were all relatively close to the imperial tent. Today, the Empress of Beimang was anxious for the officials of the Northern and Southern Dynasties. As a routine meeting, everyone sat on an embroidered stool in a circle. There was no difference in height between the seats. However, the white-haired but hale and hearty old lady still sat like the Empress of the Central Plains. On her left was the prefect of the chess and sword music school, and on her right was the Beimang god of war, Toba, Bodhisattva. One was civil and the other was military. However, when the two were arranged in order, civil and military were mixed up. There was no clear confrontation between civil and military, like in the imperial court of Liang. As Dongzhuo rose to become the king of the southern courtyard, his position was getting closer to Empress Murong. However, he was still separated by the prefect of Orange Province, Murong Baoding. Today, after Fatty Dong entered the tent, he was absent-minded. He looked up and counted with his thick fingers, counting how many seats he was behind Her Majesty. Anyway, he was already the highest official in the southern dynasties. However, there were still many old men with the surname Yalu or Murong who occupied the latrine but did not shit. Even if they were old and dizzy and could no longer straighten their backs, they still forced themselves to participate in this meeting. Dongzhuo met the eyes of a smiling old man. If you remember correctly, the old man was called Yalu Honkai. When he was young, he had done a few heroic deeds. These years, he had not done anything. The old man smiled foolishly at Dongzhuo. Feeling bored, Dongzhuo also smiled foolishly at the old man. Just like that, The two of them competed. In the end, Dongzhuo's face was stiff from smiling, but the smile on the other side was still so lively and lively. Dongzhuo was defeated. He rubbed his cheeks and gave the old man a thumbs up. Yalu Hongcai's smile did not diminish as he picked his nose. The old man did not hide his pride at all. Dongzhuo could not help but roll his eyes. Was this guy the roly-poly man who had been under Beimang's orders for 3 dynasties? When Yelu Wanshu of the Holy Sect died, this old man and 6 others were present to receive orders. Their seats were at the bottom. When Shenzong passed away, Yelu Hongcai was ranked 3rd out of the 5 people present. When the former emperor died, he was present with great General Yelu Shulai, a remnant of the Central Plains, Su Huainan, Toba Bodhisattva, and Murong Baoding. He was ranked 2nd. Next, Dongzhuo subconsciously turned to look at the empress. In the large circle formed by the crowd, there was a cloth map that covered the southern part of Liang's capital and Guangling Road. While Dongzhuo was fighting with the old man, Yelu Hongcai, the empress had already discussed the future trend of the war with several great generals. They were all optimistic about the explosive power of West Chu in the short term. However, they still did not think that West Chu could succeed. It was absolutely impossible for them to succeed in reviving the country. The empress mainly wanted to ask the generals how short this short term was. Was it a few months or half a year? Or could it be a deadlock until next autumn? Then, under various possibilities, she asked the civil officials how much the national treasury of Liang Imperial Court would be reduced. While they were discussing the overall situation, a few young people from West Chu also reached the ears of the Beimang Empress. Among them, Xie Shibian received the most, as many as 4 times. Ko Jianghuai followed closely behind with 3 times. The Empress's interest was piqued, but in the end, she only said, "It's a pity that he was born in the wrong place at the right time." Within the tent, the Northern Mang military generals all believed that with Chao Zhangqing presiding over the Eastern Front, they would still win the battle against Guangling Prince Zhao Yi. However, what followed would depend on the commander-in-chief of the Zhao clan in Liang who would clean up the mess. Would it be the Lu Shengxiang who was suffering from a lot of difficulties, or would it be the Minister of War Liu Baijie who was appointed in the face of danger? It was to the extent where it might even be the Northern Mang's greatest threat further north, the Great Pillar State Gujiantang. In the opinion of the Imperial Peace Commissioner, the Liang Imperial Court looked down on West Chu too much. Furthermore, without Gu Jiantang in charge of the Ministry of War, the speed at which the Liang Imperial Court operated was simply a world of difference compared to 20 years ago. However, the Imperial Peace Commissioner was also deeply worried. He said that the more Liang was attacked by West Chu, the more concentrated and flourishing the military power in Gu Jiantang's hands would be in the future. In the long run, it could barely be considered a good and a bad situation. Dongzhuo didn't participate in this discussion that didn't have many objections. When Fatty Dong saw the Empress raise her hand, not only did the group of third-rank civil officials, but also a large group of arrogant and domineering generals, it could be said that almost everyone's spirits were lifted. Dongzhuo also restrained his expression. He only saw 4 young female officials carry out another map and lay it on top of the original map. When that extremely detailed, colored map appeared in everyone's vision, Dongzhuo saw that even Yelu Hongcai, a toothless tiger, narrowed his eyes, leaned forward slightly, and carefully stared at the 10 feet long and wide map. Probably because his eyesight was old and weak, the old man slowly stood up and took a few steps forward. In all of Beimang, he was the only one who could bring a retainer into the tent to participate in the discussion. At that time, the retainer behind Yelu Hongcai tried to support him, but the old man waved his hand and refused. Following Yelu Hongcai's solemn stand-up, most of the Beimang bigwigs didn't dare to continue sitting. Instead, they followed the old man and left the embroidery stool. It was a large map of the desolate situation. Chapter 1172. At first, there were still a few people who hadn't stood up. It was only when Empress Murong stood up that they followed suit. The old woman's face no longer had the calm and leisurely expression she had before. In a low voice, she said, "I know that even now there are still people who want to attack the Eastern Front first. They believe that as long as they take over the incomplete Eastern Front in Gu Jiantang's hands, they can drive south and occupy Great and City in the Liang dynasty in one fell swoop. They feel that this is the wisest move to get things done once and for all. As soon as she said this, the atmosphere in the king's tent immediately became solemn. Many of the generals and the head of discipline had ugly expressions on their faces. The old woman suddenly laughed self-deprecatingly. There are also people who believe that the reason I insist on attacking the Western Front is because I'm angry with Su Xiao, who is already dead. Dong Zhuo couldn't help but laugh. As a result, he was glared at a dozen times by the important people in the tent. Ordinary Beimang officials had long been scared out of their wits. Fatty Dong raised his head and imitated Yelu Honkai to pick his nose. The old woman continued to laugh. You can think this way if you want. It doesn't matter. I only want to tell you one thing today. The decision to attack the Western Front cannot be changed. Whoever opposes it, I'll give you one last chance. Now leave this tent. Very quickly, a few elders of the king's court snorted coldly in unison and strode out of the king's tent. These elders were all former eagles of the grasslands. Each of them had the surname Yelu. Even now, they still held considerable military power in their hands. They were like the vassals of the Liang dynasty. The system of the Beimang king's court had always been loose. They each did things their own way and only accepted the empress's restrictions in name. Among the elders, there was no lack of people who hadn't participated in the northern expedition against the Liang dynasty more than 10 years ago. However, even Her Majesty couldn't settle accounts with them after the autumn. In the eyes of these elders, only the Eastern Front was profitable. The Western Front? Beiliang's 300,000 soldiers. So what if they were all killed? Beiliang was a godforsaken place. It was not even as fertile as the grasslands in their own grasslands. Marching southward, they were in western Shu, where even Beimang children knew the rugged roads. It was a place that had never produced an emperor who unified the Central Plains. It was also a place where the Beimang armored cavalry had to dismount and fight. Along the way, not only would many people die, but they would also get very few things. Who would be happy? If an old woman like you is willing to listen to that bullshit order of peace, we won't accompany you. Following the departure of these unruly Yelu Wangye in large strides, 3 out of 10 people in the king's tent left. Fortunately, none of the commandants and generals of the Southern Dynasty left. Furthermore, Taoba Bodhisattva was always standing beside the empress. Yelu Honkai didn't move an inch and stared at the map. This old man didn't move. Although 7 or 8 important people in their 50s or 60s were restless, they still patiently stayed in the king's tent. Empress Murong's expression didn't change. She didn't even look at those people's backs. She pinched a piece of charcoal with 2 fingers and looked at the map under her feet. She stretched out one hand and pressed it down. She smiled and said, "Let's all sit down." After all, other than our king from the southern courtyard and a few young men, most of them aren't young anymore. A group of people sat on the edge of the map. The officials who were further away from the old woman naturally sat on the territory of Liang. The one who was furthest south sat on the territory of Nanzhao. After waiting for everyone to sit down, the empress joked, "I don't know how to use troops. I only know that we Beimang have millions of troops. It shouldn't be possible for them to line up at the border of Gu Serong and Long Yi prefectures. It's better for the commandant of peace to explain the specific matters." The commandant of peace nodded. He carried the charcoal and walked to the map. However, he didn't go straight to the border of Liangmang. Instead, he squatted down near the eastern border and drew a semicircle that faced the interior of the grassland. He calmly said, "The restoration of West Chu has restrained the military forces of Liang's capital and its environs. However, Gu Jiantang's movements are inclined towards the south and biding his time. However, these two tendencies don't mean that Liang will definitely watch with folded arms. It's possible that Liang Beiliang will let bygones be bygones. We are different from the Liang imperial court, which only thinks about gaining the most benefits in everything. Everything should be based on the worst-case scenario. which is that if Gu Jiantang sends his troops to the north, it will lead to a terrible situation where the two fronts will cooperate with each other. Therefore, old General Yelu Hongkai, Helian Weiwu, and Murong Baoding will lead their troops to pretend to pressure the border. As long as Gu Jiantang has the courage to come out in full force, we will show the corresponding courage and retreat as we fight. Then, we will retreat to the arc I drew and stop here. We won't take a single step back. Helian Weiwu nodded. Murong Baoding remained silent. The bony Yelu Honkai looked at the arc and didn't refute. The Commandant of Peace paused for a moment and said in a flat tone, "Next, we also have two fronts to fight, but not at the same time. The southern front will be handed over to the king of the south courtyard, Dong Zhuo. Her Majesty won't interfere with a single soldier. But before that, the northern front will be Baimang's backyard. It will be handed over to the great general Tuoba Bodhisattva to clean up. The target will be the grassland tribes that just walked out of the king's tent." Yelu Hongsai's eyelids twitched. He slowly raised his head and asked in a hoarse voice, "Your Majesty, isn't it easy to kill them on the spot?" The Empress of Baimang smiled and shook her head. She replied, "Too little. PS1. Fire Beacon teasing feudal lords 10-cent tribe has officially opened. Welcome everyone's attention. Let me tell you the methods to follow. There are two. Method 1. Open your mobile phone QQ. Click News. Click Interested Tribe. Under the people nearby, click Interested. Find Fire Beacon teasing feudal lords and follow. Method 2. Open your mobile phone QQ. Click Contacts. Click Life Services. Click Interested Tribe. Click Discover. Click Interested. Find Fire Beacon teasing feudal lords and follow. You can enter my tribe after completing the above operations. PS2. You can also follow the WeChat public platform. Please search Fenghua 1985. Chapter 1173. More than 100 men and women in white quietly went north. They first crossed the sea and then entered Shu. They collected thunder and lightning on the mountain peak, collected rootless Een water, subdued mountain elves, and purified wandering ghosts. They only avoided ordinary people and did not show up easily. Occasionally, woodcutters and hunters who crossed the mountains and rivers bumped into this group of immortals. However, they only caught a glimpse of them and mistakenly thought that they had bumped into the gods of the mountains and rivers. In a panic, they hurriedly knelt down to pay their respects. When they mustered up the courage to look up, they were already gone. These 96 immortal masters of the Guanyin sect came from an isolated island in the South Sea. Their purpose was different from the Qi cultivators of the dragon supporting sect in the north. They never meddled in the affairs of the imperial court. Occasionally, they would go to the land of Shenzhou and live in the mountains and forests like this time. This time, the Guanyin sect came out in full force. This was a rare scene that had never happened in the 600 years since the founding of the sect. The founding emperor of the Great Feng dynasty once issued a decree to invite the island owner to join the imperial court as the teacher of the emperor. The Guanyin sect refused the decree and almost caused a war. However, the sky was high and the earth was far away from the sea. The island owner of the Guanyin sect did not come personally this time. Among the 6 elders, except for a 100-year-old man who stayed on the island to guard the gate of the Guanyin sect, the rest of the elders followed the team. In addition, there were 4 generations below the island owner, a total of 98 Qi cultivators. They went north together. They crossed the mountains and crossed the rivers. Everyone's white clothes fluttered in the wind, and they looked like immortals. This night, they rested in a deep mountain forest somewhere in the old western Shu. They stopped by the lake and followed the ancient method of using the sky as their blanket and the earth as their bed. Except for their light luggage, which was loaded with simple clothes and coarse dry food, there was nothing cumbersome. There were both men and women in the Guanyin sect. However, there were more women than men. There were about 3 women and 1 man. There was a pier on the big lake where the Guanyin sect was temporarily stationed. On the shore, there was an ancient drying rack and banner of scriptures. However, it had been abandoned for many years and it was rotten everywhere. Under the moonlight, the lake water sparkled like a large piece of green jade. Most of the young Qi cultivators sat by the lake and watched the moon on the lake to comprehend the mystery. Similar to the Taoist priest who entered the first pin, most of the Qi cultivators who had a high cultivation level mastered one or two kinds of mysteries of the Taoist finger. The younger the Qi cultivators were, the more difficult it was for them to become a talent. But in the past 100 years, the most talented person in the Guanyin sect was still the girl who learned the finger mystery at the age of 12 and entered the finger mystery realm at the age of 21. But at that time, the young sword godly Chungang was the most respected person on the mainland. His wooden bull was invincible, and he actually beat this stunning girl back to the South Sea. Since then, she had never set foot on the mainland. But at the age of 70, she finally found a last disciple and taught her everything she knew. Just like her, the teacher who taught her, the disciple roamed the Jianghu of the Central Plains at a young age. It seemed that she was luckier than her, the teacher, as she had not died young. But in reality, there was only a thin line between them. If the young king did not remember that he still had a 3-year agreement with the Guanyin sect, not only would he have taken away the land pilgrimage painting, this young girl, who was nicknamed the Charcoal Girl, would also have drowned in the Jianghu. She had abducted more than 100 swords of Su Fingnian from the Yuyan Mountain Villa, and in the end, she had returned one of the 2 most important treasures of the Guanyin sect, which was a great loss. But for some reason, when she was escorted back to the seaside by the mysterious swordsman Mi Fengjie, she anxiously boarded the ship back to the sect. She had thought of dozens of reasons and excuses in her head, but none of them were of any use. She only needed to call her senior martial sister, but the island master turned a deaf ear to her, let alone reprimand her. Even now, when she stepped on a land once more, the Charcoal Girl still couldn't figure out the reason. At this moment, she was walking on the ancient trestle with her senior martial sister and a female Qi cultivator who had to call her senior martial granduncle. Perhaps because of a guilty conscience, the Charcoal Girl didn't have the same unrestrained behavior as she did on the island in the past. She was so honest and well-behaved that the group of martial nephews found it inconceivable. The Charcoal Girl's senior martial sister was the sect master of the Guanyin sect. Just like the rumors of the Central Plains, her appearance was like that of a newly married woman. Originally, no matter how much a woman took care of herself, the corners of her eyes, which easily revealed her true age, didn't have the slightest wrinkle. Her skin was as smooth as jade, and under the moonlight, it faintly flowed with brilliance. Her eyebrows were charming, but her figure was especially tall, half a head taller than the northern men. It could be said that her figure was extraordinarily robust. There was a simple bronze mirror hanging at her waist. Looking at the rippling waves on the lake, she asked softly, "Since entering Shu, have you gained anything?" Chapter 1174. It was a woman who looked older than her. She carried a black scabbard rune sword on her back. This woman, named Ingyi, was nearly 30 years old, but she looked at most in her early 20s. She was still in her prime, but she paled in comparison to the owner of the island, who was a few steps away from her. She replied respectfully, "The land of Shu is the transition zone between the high and low of the divine land. It is like the 2 forces of east and west fighting against each other here. Therefore, the land of Shu has always been a place where dragons fight against each other. It is difficult to get in and out. Therefore, it can't be the place where dragons rise in the eyes of the world. Those peaceful governments have never been able to affect the general trend of the Central Plains dynasty." This point didn't change because Chen Jibao entered Shu and was given the title of king. It could be seen that the Minister of War of Liang was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. It not only restrained the expansion of Bailiang, but also limited Chen Jibao's own fate. But he couldn't see through one thing. Since our sect entered Shu, there was a huge amount of great spirit pouring into the land of Shu. Chen Jibao took the opportunity to leave Shu and enter Nanzhao. In Nanzhao, there is a county king from the previous dynasty of Liang who has been unpopular for a long time. Chen Jibao should have swallowed this person's fate and become like a tiger with wings. But Chen Jibao didn't do it in a remote place, which is another strange thing. The Charcoal Girl wrinkled her nose and said, The land of Shu has been a place where dragons are locked in since ancient times. But at that time, the Emperor of Liang didn't have the intention to plot against Bao. He intended to place him in the northern territory of Nanjiang, with Gu Jiantang in the north and the south, guarding the country's gate. But Bao himself insisted on entering Shu. In my opinion, Bao is a lunatic with a lofty ambition. He thinks that even if he is alone in Shu County and starts from scratch, he can still achieve great things. He wants to do something that no one has ever done before to show others. There is no man more conceited than him in the world. Senior sister, don't you think so? The master of the Guanyin sect was noncommittal. She asked, "Girl selling charcoal, can you identify the source of the great spirit that entered Shu County?" The charcoal girl blinked. "Senior sister, do you really want me to say it?" The sect master seemed to be in a trance for a moment. He changed the topic and said softly, "We're going to Bailiang this time. After we enter the country, we're not allowed to cause any trouble. Especially you, the charcoal girl. Do you hear me?" The girl lowered her head and said, "Oh, if I find out that you went to cause trouble for the king of Bailiang, you will be punished for both crimes." The charcoal girl, who had been rolling her eyes, suddenly became dispirited. She asked in a sickly voice, "Senior sister, Dong Tai is too arrogant. Not only did he raise waves to drown our Guanyin sect, but why do we allow him to stay on the island as a guest, and even let him swagger away? If Senior Apprentice Sister hadn't come out of seclusion in advance, he would have been clamoring to smash the well that suppresses countless demons. Uncle can tolerate this kind of person who barges into our home and causes trouble, but Aunt can't. Senior Apprentice Sister, it's not like you can't beat him. Besides, even if you weren't sure you could win, Dong Tai had just fought with that old man. The two tigers were locked in a stalemate. Senior Apprentice Sister, you could have taken care of both of them in one go. Then on this trip to Bailiang, wouldn't we be able to ask for a sky-high price and sit on the ground?" The sect master smiled and smacked the charcoal girl's head with a finger. "If your heart isn't in the right place, your chi won't flow smoothly. If your chi isn't flowing smoothly, your majestic chi won't be able to leave your body, just like how a famed sword won't be able to leave its scabbard. What can you do?" The charcoal girl hugged her head with both hands, looking wronged. The sect master smiled gently. "I know you're saying this on purpose for Senior Apprentice Sister's sake. You're afraid that Senior Apprentice Sister will be obstructed by Dong Tai and delay your journey. Charcoal girl, you're thinking too much. Even if Senior Apprentice Sister didn't come out of seclusion in advance, she knows that she can't beat Dong Tai. But so what? Chi cultivators of our generation don't need to compete with others in martial arts. What we need to do is to suppress and subdue those fish that escape the net." The charcoal girl sighed. "Senior Apprentice Sister, there will be countless vengeful ghosts at Guangling Road that need to be exorcised. We can also accumulate merit, and it's safe there. Why don't we go there? Why do we have to go to Bailiang and take the risk?" The sect master shook her head. "First of all, there are Chi cultivators in the north who rely on the Zhao clan. If we go there, are we going to fight recklessly? Moreover, there's one more thing to confirm when we go to Bailiang. That is this generation's Zhenwu really the one who stopped wars? It wasn't easy for Liang to unify the Central Plains. It has only been slightly more than 20 years since the world was settled. If Bailiang were to cause chaos, then it would become a huge joke." The charcoal girl was stunned for a moment. She asked softly, "To pacify the world for the sake of the enemy. In that case, isn't that person surnamed Su a bigger joke than the biggest joke in the world?" The sect master turned her head and asked, "Then why do you still harbor resentment towards him?" The charcoal girl chuckled. "I won't lower myself to his level." The sect master looked at the surface of the lake that was as calm as a mirror. "All right then, you'll take the lead. We have to bring gifts when we visit this time." The charcoal girl gave a sound of acknowledgement. Her expression became serious and solemn. The female Chi cultivator who was standing at the side with a sword on her back was a little surprised. She did not understand the reason and could only wait and see. The charcoal girl said that she would first serve the toast and then the punishment wine. She raised her ring finger and dipped it into the lake water, and flicked it into the air. It was as if she was lighting up the wine in the cup. She flicked the lake water 3 times in a row to toast the heaven, earth, and ancestors respectively. After this, more than 90 chi cultivators who were sitting or sleeping by the lake stood up upon hearing the news. They were as if they were facing a great enemy. After the 3 toasts, the charcoal girl made hand seals with both hands and said loudly to the people by the lake. They would inject their chi into their respective talisman, swords for the time being, and then give up on controlling them. The chi cultivators of the Guanyin sect did not care about seniority and did as they were told. One must know that the charcoal girl was born with a strange talent of a sword embryo. Be it chi cultivation or martial arts, she could achieve twice the results with half the effort. There were 36 chi cultivators who carried swords. Only a small portion of them carried a few talisman swords. The one with the most had 7 swords in the box and a total of 84 talisman swords on the lake. The sword light shone in all directions and was dazzling in 5 colors. Something split open the surface of the lake, revealing a huge and ferocious head. At the same time, the sect master of the Guanyin sect did not stare at the lake dragon that emerged from the water. Instead, she turned to look at the top of the mountain. Someone stood there with a white bowl floating in front of him. Chapter 1175. In the lake, the yellow dragon broke through the surface of the water. It straightened its body and looked down at the 3 girls on the bridge. This spiritual creature had no horns but scales. The chi cultivators of the north called it the earth dragon. According to legend, it was a creature of the dragon and Leviathan. Its body was like a snake, but it had 4 legs. 2 strands of dark yellow dragon whiskers swayed slightly. Its 2 dragon eyes carried emotions similar to humans. It should not be underestimated. The body of this giant dragon was 60 feet long. Its 2 claws pressed on the surface of the lake. It narrowed its eyes and breathed out a wisp of faint green breath from its mouth. It seemed to be mocking the chi cultivators on the bridge for overestimating their own abilities. The dragon was a descendant of the dragon. It was said that it had unparalleled power. The dragon pearl in its mouth was the most precious. It only existed in supernatural novels, and no one had seen it. Even the chi cultivators who were good at looking for the dragon's acupuncture points would not be able to see the true appearance of the dragon in their lifetime. Most of the immortals of the Guanyin sect were immersed in amazement. This was a living giant dragon. As long as the talisman weapon of the chi cultivators was related to the dragon, it was a priceless treasure. However, the charcoal girl on the bridge was not surprised. She had seen a black dragon in the Earth-Lung Mountain. Compared to the black dragon that stole the first blessed land of Taoism, this yellow dragon paled in comparison. The current Wudong chief, Li Yufu, who had been missing for a long time, made a name for himself by slaying the dragon in the Earth-Lung Mountain. The charcoal girl quickly formed a seal with her hands and jumped into the water. She walked on the surface of the lake and began to run around the yellow dragon. She said the 9 words Sanskrit mantra, Lin Bing Do Zhal formations advance. She supplemented it with the 9 hand seals, including the lion seal. Out of the 84 flying swords, 3 stayed still, and the 81 swords formed a small formation of 9 swords. The 9 small formations formed a big sword formation. The talisman swords floated above the water with different heights. The tips of the swords pointed downwards, and they spat out gang chi. Under the influence of each other, countless water snakes seemed to swim on the surface of the lake. Finally, they formed the seal of treasured vase and trapped the yellow dragon. After the charcoal girl formed the seal, although the sword formation was successfully completed, she looked relaxed. She muttered that she must catch this long worm. However, she didn't underestimate her opponent. She glided gracefully on the surface of the lake. While her delicate body tilted, her slender hand drew on the surface of the water as if she was scribbling. Then she whispered, "Rise." Unexpectedly, she picked up a jade tablet from the water, just like the one used by the officials in the morning court. She continued to walk around the yellow dragon. The emerald water tablet suddenly glowed brightly, and the chi of purple myrtle swirled around it. The girl who sold charcoal walked behind the yellow dragon and held the tablet with both of her hands, as if she was a minister serving the emperor. She said in a deep voice, "Evil retreats. Qi of Tao lives forever." The charcoal girl's sword formation was a talisman. She raised her hands. The yellow dragon, which was as still as a statue. He is, and it is. He raised his claw and pressed it gently on the surface of the lake. He was only one step away from breaking the sword formation. The yellow dragon, who had its back to the charcoal girl, seemed to be surprised. It thought for a while. Then it turned its head. It bit the big tablet made of condensed qi and tore into pieces. The talisman in the charcoal girl's hand also showed traces of cracks. The yellow dragon shook its head. Its dragon whiskers fluttered. Then it opened its eyes wide and showed its mouth. Like a heavenly king, it roared at the girl who was as small as an ant. The girl selling charcoal was still holding the water tablet in her hand. Her body slid backward on the surface of the lake. Her black hair fluttered in the wind due to the dragon's breath. The charcoal girl retreated until she was a few feet away from the shore. Then she let go of the tablet. The tablet did not fall to the ground. The charcoal girl muttered, "You dare to spit on me? I'll teach you a lesson." She glanced at the sword formation. Then she began to run on the lake again. She said softly, "With one thought, I can create a purple canopy. With one thought, I can understand nature. With one thought, I can ascend to Tai Ching. Never forget, I will tell the 9 heavens." Every time she said "with one thought," the remaining 3 swords would rise higher and rise into the moon. The charcoal girl's body was purple and gold. She looked like a god in the eyes of others. The yellow dragon stared at the familiar breath. It seemed to be afraid. Then it became furious. It slammed its claws on the lake surface. The dragon claws hidden at the bottom of the lake also began to overturn the river and sea. Even a trapped beast would put up a fight. Moreover, it was a demigod longevity spirit that was close to becoming a dragon. The entire lake immediately boiled. White mist rose, and the heaven and earth shook. Although the charcoal girl's 3 talisman swords pierced into the lake from the sky one after another, except for one that was swept away by the dragon's tail, the other 2 were nailed into the yellow dragon's back. However, the yellow dragon did not seem to be seriously injured. Instead, it fueled its craziness. Its 4 claws rose and fell repeatedly. The dragon raised its head and smashed the water with its tail. Its roar was like thunder. The lake water overflowed and soaked the shore. The Qi cultivators of the Guanyin sect had already retreated. Only the senior sister who sold charcoal girl on the pier did not move. However, she was no longer looking at the top of the mountain. Instead, she looked at the yellow dragon with pity. The dragon's breath in the lake could be traced back to the highland. She ordered calmly, "Ingi, keep your breath in the bottle." The female immortal master on the pier nodded. Her hands formed a seal. Then, she took a deep breath and absorbed the dragon's breath in the lake into her stomach. Chapter 1176. The yellow flood dragon, whose head was originally facing the girl selling charcoal, quickly sensed the theft behind it. It slowly turned its huge head and stared at the 2 Qi refinement warriors on the bridge. The sect master frowned and said, "Girl selling charcoal, stop playing." The girl selling charcoal giggled and said that she knew. She took out a jade pendant with a pair of dragon tails carved on it from her sleeves. She revealed a pained and aggrieved expression and crushed the jade pendant with a sigh. Her senior sister looked at the lakeshore and said calmly, "Sunya, Qi Lei wins." A young male Qi refinement warrior heard and immediately opened the luggage at his feet, revealing a piece of bluestone carved with a coiling dragon. It was squarish and weighed no less than 50 kilograms. There was a hole on each of the 6 sides of the coiling dragon. Red lightning was circulating and lingering in the holes. The young man held up the coiling dragon and shouted angrily, throwing it into the lake. The sect master on the bridge gave out orders in an orderly manner. Qi Longzhong formed the mirror. The other middle-aged Qi refinement warrior withstood the huge pressure that almost suffocated him. He rushed to the side of the lake and squatted down. He extended his arms into the lake. With him as the starting point, the surface of the lake started to freeze at a speed visible to the naked eye. At this moment, the girl selling charcoal in the lake had already crushed the pair of coiling dragon jade pendants. Two coiling dragons that were inferior in size to the yellow flood dragon appeared on the lake. On the bridge, the female Qi refinement warrior named Yingyi was frantically absorbing the dragon aura of the yellow flood dragon. After the young Qi refinement warrior, Xianxia, threw out the coiling dragon, it hovered above the lake. A bolt of lightning struck the coiling dragon, 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 coiling dragon. The Qi refinement warrior who was in charge of forming the mirror had already frozen the entire surface of the lake. The lake was filled with chilly air. Everything was fine except for the east wind. The girl selling charcoal, who had hidden countless superior-grade talisman weapons on her, was about to use her trump card. Just as she was about to subdue the dragon, a strange phenomenon occurred. The yellow flood dragon vanished without a trace. The sect master of Guanyin sect also vanished from the bridge instantly. On the mountain peak, she looked at the middle-aged scholar who was looking down at the big white bowl in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Xia, don't push your luck." The scholar raised his head and smiled. "Tantai Pingjing, don't flaunt your seniority just because you're older. It's not cute for a woman to act like this." The sect leader sneered. "You, CFAU, have watched your country fall apart and your family die. You have cultivation, but you still hide your head and tail. In the end, you don't even dare to acknowledge your daughter. Are you a man?" The scholar was still smiling as he teased. "Women have long hair, but short insight." The tall woman whose real name was Tantai Pingjing had a dark expression. Clearly, she was angry for the first time. While the Guanyin sect had never cared about worldly disputes, and its rise and fall were decided by the heavens, this person had said that as long as he did not leave Great Peace City, the great Qi cultivators of the south would not take a step past the Guangling River. This was an unnecessary move to target the Guanyin sect. The scholar whose real age could not be determined did not look at Tantai Pingjing's expression. He lowered his head and looked at the bowl. There was a small yellow flood dragon swimming in the bowl. Other than that, there were two small flood dragons and a red flood dragon of about the same length. There were no more flood dragons in the land of Shu. They were all in my bowl. The scholar smiled and said softly, "We are all outsiders who go with the flow. We know that the world has its own rules. You want to use this flood dragon to replenish the qi of the king of Bailiang, Su Fingyan. You're breaking the rules." Tantai Pingjing said sarcastically. "Then you're not breaking the rules by helping Chun Zhibao catch the flood dragon of Shu and paving the way for him?" The scholar with the surname Xie shook his head and said, "You are far from understanding the heavenly Tao. Although we are in the same line of work, I work hard while you Qi cultivators only work hard." The corner of Tantai Pingjing's mouth curled up. Her eyes were filled with pity, just like how she looked at the yellow flood dragon earlier. The scholar looked around and said with an amiable smile, "I know you have a backup plan. It's Deng Tea's flying sword. I'm not good at fighting, but if I can't beat him, I can always run away, right?" Only the tall woman was left on the top of the mountain. However, from the top of the mountain to the middle of Shu, there was a series of continuous thunder. Two men appeared beside Tantai Pingjing. They were an ordinary middle-aged man and a one-armed old man, Dong Tai and Sui Xiegu. She cast an inquiring look. Dong Tai, who had quietly used the earth immortal sword, rubbed his chin and said self-mockingly, "Did this guy put oil on the soles of his feet? He ran so fast that I couldn't catch up." Tantai Pingjing sighed and felt a little sorry. She asked, "Where are you going next?" Dong Tai said calmly, "I'm going to look for my disciple. Anyway, Bailiang will definitely not go." Elder Sui will be enough to accompany you. Sui Siegu glanced at the tall woman and laughed. Little Tantai, since the first time I saw you, I have been chasing you for more than 80 years. Are you really not going to give me a chance? If you agree, I will impart everything I know to that charcoal girl. Tantai Pingjing completely ignored this old bastard and went down a mountain. Sui Siegu bared his teeth. Dong Tai, who was a few generations younger than these two, joked, Elder, chasing girls is not like practicing swords. How can you be so direct? Sui Siegu glared and said, Aren't you a bachelor? Even at this old man's age, you are still a bachelor. Dong Tai laughed loudly. Thank you for your kind words. After laughing, Dong Tai said emotionally, Old Man Wu is not really a stubborn antique. He has finally done something that makes me feel good. Sui Siegu nodded and said, 99 swords. Together with this old man's broken sword, we have exactly 100 swords. It will be enough for the northern barbarians to suffer. Dong Tai hesitated and said, If it is possible, perhaps we should add in my sword. However, at that point, the outcome may have already been decided. It is no longer necessary to add to the icing on the cake. Sui Siegu's heroic spirit soared, and he laughed. Let's not talk about other things. When the time comes, it will be the best sword in the entire Central Plains. Together with the 300,000 Baoyang sabers, this scene. Chapter 1177. A trade caravan entered the territory of Liuzhou and came to the Mazong Mountain between Liangzhou and Qingtsang City. At a glance, all one could see were brown desert hills, which were difficult to farm. The mountain was shaped like a row of geese going north and south. Between the mountain passes, the wind was strong and the sand flew like knives. The caravan going from east to west had to pass through here. After the imperial court incorporated the original 3 provinces of Baoyang into its territory, leaving this place was considered leaving the border. In the past 20 years, there was no lack of poets who traveled to this place, and many of their popular poems about the border were spread throughout the imperial court. This time, Baoyang set up Liuzhou. About half a year later, the Liang imperial court issued an edict, and dozens of people were promoted. The main reason was that Yang Guangdou was promoted to the position of governor of Liuzhou. The officials of the Central Plains had never heard of this person, but they knew that this was Zhao Ting having no choice but to admit that the Su family controlled the sky in Baoyang. The imperial edict of Great Peace City was released almost at the same time as the news of Beimang's army invading the south. Immediately, there were people in the capital who rejoiced in other people's misfortune, saying, Let's see how long you can run rampant in Baoyang. As the rumors of Beimang moving troops to the western border were confirmed, it actually washed away a lot of the haze of Guangling's defeat. In many people's eyes, as long as they did not attack the eastern border guarded by General Gu Jiantang, Liang did not have to fight on 2 fronts. Secondly, Liang Mang's fight to the death was like a dog biting a dog. After all, if Beimang was a wild dog drooling over the fat meat of the Central Plains, then Baoyang was not much better. To the Liang imperial court, it was always a disobedient watchdog, wild and difficult to tame. As Baoyang gradually relaxed its restrictions on Lu province, some refugees could not only return home to worship their ancestors, they could even join the army at the border. Furthermore, the old Baoyang from the 3 old provinces could also smoothly enter Lu province, keenly searching for business opportunities. This group of horses traveling through Mazong Mountain was one such example. The owner of the group of horses was a large family in Lingzhou. For generations, they had been involved in businesses such as tea, horses, salt, and iron. Their ancestors had followed Rintu on many expeditions. After the Su family settled down in Baoyang, the old man, who had only reached the rank of a 4th-rank general, died of an old illness on the battlefield. It was said that even the king of Baoyang had personally come to the mourning hall to pay his respects. This kind of honor could be counted on one hand within Baoyang, where there were as many general families as there were hairs on an ox. Following the death of the old Liang Su Xiao, this treatment became even more of a protective talisman for this family. When other families' businesses at the border began to wither and become difficult to continue, their business became more and more unimpeded. They even successfully extended their family's branches into Lu province. Within the group of nearly 100 people, there were two outsiders. They were a pair of master and disciple. The people in charge of the group, who often traveled to dangerous places at the border, were not very welcoming. However, they heard that it was a popular official in Lingzhou, who even the Fu family could not afford to offend, who said that the son of an aristocratic family had nothing better to do and wanted to travel beyond the Great Wall. They had no choice but to accept him into the group. Other than the old master of the Fu family, who had painstakingly accumulated incense, the next two generations of the younger generation had all followed the teachings of their ancestors and stayed away from the political scene. It was inevitable that they would show signs of fatigue. After all, they still had to act according to the mood of others. The nominal leader of the Fu family was the eldest grandson of the Fu family's third branch, Fu Xianxia. He was then handed over to two experienced Jianghu people who were familiar with the border. This Fu Xianxia had a scholarly air. However, it was rumored that the martial arts instructor in the family was full of praise for his talent in martial arts. As for the depth of his moves, no one had ever seen him fight. Zhao Jiabao and Feng Qianxiang, who had trained their discerning eyes through the ups and downs of Jianghu, were also not sure. The rule of Jianghu was that it was easy to look at the weak and difficult to look at the strong. Presumably, Fu Xianxing's skills were not too bad. The group of horses rested behind a mountain in the shape of a wild goose to temporarily avoid the wind and sand. Fu Xianxing sat with his back against the mountain wall. He carefully picked up the newly made sheepskin water bag and drank a mouthful of the warm and smelly water. The Fu family had always had this tradition. When the children of the Fu family went to the border for the first time, they would have the older woman in the family sew a water bag and the male elder would hand it to them. Even though the new water bag had been dried to get rid of the fishy smell, it was still unbearable after it was filled with water. For the children of the wealthy, this was no different from a kind of torture. However, the Fu family was simple and honest. Most of the descendants had tough personalities. After Fu Xianxing's initial discomfort, he was able to drink water without any change in expression. He glanced at the master and disciple standing in the distance. The master was about the same age as him and was handsome. He should have been the head of the group in Lingzhou, but for some reason, he came to the border to ask for trouble. The disciple was an unremarkable child. However, after entering Liuzhou, he was like a fish in water compared to many of the Fu family members who were used to going beyond the Great Wall. Fu Xianxing observed carefully along the way. At this time, he said to the two seniors, "Uncle Zhao, Uncle Feng, that Su Qi doesn't seem like someone who is going to the border for the first time. He doesn't need us to remind him. The amount of water he drinks each time is very appropriate, and he never drinks because he is thirsty. The way he treats people is also smooth and slick, unlike those aristocratic children who don't know the ways of the world. Furthermore, there aren't many large families in Lingzhou that our Fu family is wary of. I have never heard of such a person." Zhao Jiabao, who had been a retainer of the Fu family for more than 20 years, did not need to bow and scrape before the head of the family. He also had a close relationship with the head of the third branch. Therefore, along the way, he taught Fu Xianxing everything he knew. Hearing Fu Xianxing's experienced words, his old heart was comforted. A sincere smile appeared on his old, mottled face. He nodded and said, "That young man called Su Qi walks in the middle of the group and suffers less than young master, but his calmness and composure is not something that can be faked. The food he eats while riding and when he dismounts is the same as old bones like me and Xianxiang who are used to drinking the northwest wind. Logically speaking, there is something strange about him, and we have to be careful. It is a good thing that young master can be more careful. Since young master has spoken, Xianxiang, you can also reveal the truth." Feng Qianxiang, who had a long saber on his back, smiled and said in a deep voice, "Young master, don't worry." Before the head of the family left this time, he privately told me and old Zhao that although this Su Qi's background is unknown, we can guarantee that his identity is clean and he is definitely not a bad person. However, old Zhao and I both have selfish motives. We want to see if young master can see the difference between that pair of master and disciple, so we didn't say it clearly. Young master, please don't be offended. Of course, since young, Fu Jinxing had been influenced by a family style that was very different from ordinary general families. His personality was introverted, and he slowly put away the sheepskin pouch. Pursing his dry lips, he said self-deprecatingly, "I only know the taste of the northwest wind after this trip. It really isn't much." Fu Jinxing suddenly sighed and said that Xinliu province is a place where jackals and wolves surround. Previously, the trusted aide of the Bailiang Palace, Chen Shiliang, was indeed suspected of being soft-hearted. He paid too much attention to the gains and losses of one place and refused to abandon the city. In the end, he was surrounded by 10,000 horse bandits in Xianxia City and lost the lives of dozens of white horse followers for nothing. Bailiang has guarded the border for so many years, and such losses are rare. I also don't know what kind of person the new provincial governor, Yang Guangdou, is. If he is of the same origin as Chen Shiliang, this famous person of Mount Xinliang, then the future of our Fu family will be uncertain. Taking 10,000 steps back, Fu Jinxing is dead and has delayed the great cause of Bailiang. If grandfather were still alive, he would most likely not allow this useless grandson of mine to enter the family. Zhao Jiabao was obviously not optimistic about the future and said worriedly, "Our Fu family has worked hard for Bailiang for almost 20 years. In name, we're doing business at the border, but in reality, we are secretly looking for mines. Most of Bailiang's gold and iron mines are from the Fu family. This time, when we return to Liuzhou and Fengxiang to confirm the quality and output of that mine, I think it will be a little difficult." Feng Qianxiang smiled and said, "In the end, I still hope that Bailiang can win this battle. Otherwise, the wealth that I have saved for most of my life will go down the drain. When that time comes, even if the king of Bailiang is standing in front of me, I will point at his nose and scold him." Zhao Jiabao laughed loudly. Seeing his young master's blank face, he explained, "When they heard that there was going to be a war, many of the heartless and cowardly large families in Lingzhou began to run out. However, they couldn't take their houses and fields with them, so they could only sell them at a low price. Originally, 2,000 taels of silver might not be enough to buy a good house, but 800 taels of silver would be enough. Qianxiang took advantage of the situation to rob 4 houses, and for this, he even borrowed 1,000 taels of silver from me. Speaking of which, it's strange. With such a big commotion, the government completely ignored it. They didn't care about the rule of asking their neighbors. Anyone who went to the government office would be able to get an official contract, and it wasn't even a white contract, but a real red one. Fortunately, the Governor General's residence stopped at the last moment. Every time they leave the country, they are not allowed to bring more than 100 gold and 1,000 taels of silver. Fu Jinxing asked curiously, "With so little gold and silver, could it be that they have to send people to and from Bailiang? Wouldn't those rich people find it troublesome? Even if they only have 100,000 taels of silver, 100 gold, and 1,000 taels of silver, they would still have to travel 50 times. Feng Qianxiang shook his head and smiled. "It's simple. Actually, they don't have to bring gold and silver out of the country. They could just buy antiques, calligraphy, and paintings, and it's easy and convenient. After all, no one cares if they bring a lot of them away. When they leave Bailiang, they can still be exchanged for silver. Those aristocratic families who are good at appreciating antiques have suddenly turned into VIPs in every household. Young master, you must have heard of the fish dragon gang that inexplicably rose up in Lingzhou, right? Compared to their table manners, I'm not even worth mentioning. Basically spending all their money to buy land and houses. I don't know where they got all that money from. After a rough calculation, the Fish Dragon Gang has already spent more than 800,000 taels of silver on real estate that I know of. The real amount has probably doubled. They're about to become a big landlord that owns half of Lingzhou. Even I, a man, admire the courage of the female gang leader of the Fish Dragon Gang. Young master, why don't you go and marry that woman?" Fu Jinxing wasn't someone who couldn't take a joke, but he still felt a little helpless. He mocked himself She's a heroine who is as famous as Mount Huishanzi. How about you take a fancy to me? Chapter 1178. Jiabao made a sound of surprise. That pair of master and disciple had disappeared right under their noses. The few people of the Fu family who were close to outsiders also did not notice. Fu Zhenxing carried the heavy burden of Bailiang and his family on this trip, so he was somewhat disgusted by Su Qi's decision. He looked up at the sky and said, "Let's wait for them for an hour. If we still can't find them, then we must set out. The journey between heaven and earth is truly difficult. We can't indulge them." Su Fingyan, who had brought Yu Dilong into Liuzhou, circled around to the other side of the mountain and saw a pair of unexpected acquaintances. It was Song Dongming of the Deer Song clan and his attendant. The two of them looked at each other. Song Dongming was stunned for a moment before he laughed heartily. "From the beautiful Wudong to this barren place, I can still meet this young master. It really is a small world. If young master is not worried, I still have half a bottle of wine here. It's the green ant from northern Liang. The wine is very strong. When it enters the mouth, it burns the throat, but after a while it actually becomes cool. This song has also just started to drink this wine. If I had known earlier, I would have bought a few more bottles. I regret that I was worried that I would not have enough money and bought 2 more bottles of green ant on me." Su Fingyan did not say much. He took the bottle of wine, raised it in the air, and poured a small mouthful. He handed it back to Song Dongming. The latter smiled and asked, "Why don't you drink a few more mouthfuls? It won't hurt." Su Fingyan shook his head and smiled. Su Qi, won't steal your beauty." Seeing Su Fingyan introduce himself, Song Dongming probably thought that the young master with the Bailiang accent did not know who the Deer Song family was. He said, "I am Song Dongming. My ancestors live in Deer County in Jiangnan. To have met you twice, fate is not small." Before he could finish his sentence, Song Dongming's face was hit by the wind and sand. He reached out and grabbed the mature yellow grass that had left the ground and turned into flying catkins. He sighed, 2 withers in a year, drifting with the wind. The errand boy suddenly stretched out his finger and shouted, "Sir, look! Is that the smoke signal?" Following the servant's finger, Song Dongming saw a thick smoke signal rising from the desert. It should be from the direction of Qingtsang City, reporting to Liangzhou that they were safe. They had not seen this when they first entered Lu province. No wonder his servant was so surprised. Song Dongming muttered to himself, "The ancient books say that the smoke signal here is different from the Central Plains. It is named for burning wolf dung. The smoke is straight and extremely black, and the wind cannot blow. But looking at it, other than the smoke being thicker, there is no difference between the smoke and the Central Plains." Su Fingyan laughed softly. "I'm afraid that's a mistake made by some frontier poets. In the northwest border, there may occasionally be smoke burning with wolf dung, but that is because there is not enough cow and sheep dung. Most of the materials are obtained locally. Desert poplar and red willow wood are used as firewood, supplemented by flammable reeds that can be found everywhere. Furthermore, the fire beacon of the Bailiang Frontier Army is strictly regulated. If the patrolling cavalry finds that there is not enough fire beacon, all the officials up to the 4th rank will be beheaded on the spot. No matter who pleads for mercy, it is useless. In the past 20 years of Bailiang, because of this small matter, more than 300 people have died. In the first 4 or 5 years, it was relatively less. This year, at most, more than 60 soldiers who neglected their duties were killed in one go." Song Dongming was shocked. He drank a mouthful of green ant wine before saying, 2 generations of kings have taken over the throne. The Bailiang Frontier Army is different from the other armies. There are many unruly old generals who hold the military power. They should seek stability and prevent chaos. Why are they so ruthless? In addition, there is a rumor that they secretly killed the Huaihua General Zhong Hongwu because of a disagreement. Aren't they afraid of causing a mutiny? Young Master Su, from what you said about the smoke, it is obvious that you are familiar with military affairs. Can you explain a little to Song Dongming? Su Fingyan smiled and asked, "Just because of a disagreement?" Song Dongming was very smart. Although he was trying to sound Su K out at the beginning, he knew that he would not be able to speak the words of an expert. He restrained his expression and said, "There are many leaders in the Bailiang army. The new king has to kill the chicken to warn the monkey. Otherwise, before the war starts, it will be difficult to convince the people with military achievements." Su Fengnian listened to this general explanation and lost his desire to talk. He planned to return to the Fu family's caravan. He had to protect them until they reached Qingsong City. At that time, there would naturally be an elite cavalry team secretly escorting them to the newly discovered mine in Fengxiang. If the Fu family, who had contributed a lot to Bailiang, knew that the king of Bailiang was personally escorting the king, what would they think? Would they think that their hard work over the years was worth it? Of course, Su Fengnian would not let them know the truth. This might be something that Su Weisheng, who emphasized details, did not like. As a ruler, he was not willing to buy people's hearts. Song Dongming saw that Su Fengnian was about to leave and quickly said, "Young Master Su, I heard that there are 2 young aides in the Bailiang palace. The king of Bailiang's northern courtyard's grandson, Su Beiji, has become the governor of Lingzhou. This is because the king of Bailiang does not suspect the people he uses. Instead, he used the poor scholar, Chen Shiliang. It can be said that he does not care about the quality of the people he uses. He is very good at attracting the talents of the poor families in Bailiang. Boldly speaking, if your Bailiang Dao were to form a country of its own, then these 2 people would definitely be the future prime minister's aides. However, since ancient times, important officials in the imperial court have all gone from public to private. They first used their talents and knowledge to enter the center of the imperial court. After they entered the eyes of the emperor, they were able to walk to the side of the emperor. In that case, your Mount Qingliang does not seem to follow the rules too much." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "We do not follow the rules too much. However, speaking of which, what do you think are the pros and cons of this kind of exceptional promotion?" Song Dongming smiled slightly. It was probably because he was talking about something that he was good at. His entire person suddenly seemed to have an extraordinary aura. He spoke tirelessly. In a short term, buying bones with 1,000 gold is naturally a good thing. It is especially beneficial to appease the scholars. Since even Chen Shiliang, who was thwarted in 2 major matters in succession, was not punished by the king of Bailiang, then why can't we, scholars, who are well-read and have a bellyful of literature, whose background is not inferior to Chen Shiliang's, become high officials? Su Fengnian very rudely interrupted Song Dongming's words and asked, "What does Mr. Song think of Chen Shiliang's stubbornness in defending Qingsong? Do you think that the king of Bailiang should be punished or not?" The servant had long disliked this fellow surnamed Su. His master's vision and knowledge were so great that even the famous Chinese scholars in Gangnam-do would have to listen attentively to his master's lectures. This Su Qi was indeed a barbarian in Bailiang. He only looked like a scholar, but his bearing and knowledge were a mess. Wasn't his master flirting with a blind person? The servant was just about to speak up and teach this untactful fellow a lesson when he was glanced at by Song Dongming, scaring the most disciplined servant into silence. Song Dongming continued, "As for Chen Shiliang, both reward and punishment should be used. This person seemed to be muddle-headed during the defense of the city, so much so that everyone in Bailiang thought he was someone with great ambition but little talent. However, they did not know that Bailiang does not lack soldiers, good swords and horses, or even money. The only thing it lacks is the people's hearts." Chapter 1179. Song Dongming looked into the distance and said, "The people's hearts are the foundation of people's harmony. The danger of a country is never in the geographical location, but in the people's hearts. The geographical location is a dead thing. The debate between the heavens and the people naturally falls on the 2. Confucianism, Taoism, and Moism all have their own views. Countless sages have not argued for a reason, so Song Dongming did not dare to speak carelessly. However, as a ruler, one must have a good heart, be willing to accumulate merits, and turn misfortune into fortune. This is using humanity to prove the way of heaven. Even if it cannot reverse the geographical location, it can't be wrong. If Bailiang was in the hands of the old king of Liang, Su Xiao. The 300,000 cavalry were already the best in the world. Then if it was in the hands of the new king of Liang, Su Fengyan, he could gather the people's hearts. Then the millions of households in Beiliang would have soldiers willing to fight. Even if Beimang claimed to have millions of soldiers, how could they bully Beiliang? Song Dongming said softly. Therefore, Qin Shiliang gave Beiliang a good start. Those refugees who entered the city, there were 3,000 of them. After they survived, their so-called reputation would be well known. There would be 30,000 or even more refugees in Liuzhou who would know the benevolence and righteousness of the young king. He was not the king of Beiliang who was full of benevolence and righteousness, nor was he a hypocrite who would only put porridge at the city gate. He could really help them guard the 4 prefectures of Beiliang, Yuliang, Lingling, and Liuzhou. The middle-aged scholar who was talking to himself had a solemn expression. If Qin Shiliang had chosen to retreat at that time, yes, he would have left the king of Beiliang with the white horses in the city. Unfortunately, Li Yishan's plan back then was all for naught. Li Yishan expelled the refugees from their homes and sent Beiliang's soldiers to kill and train. He was showing his power first. Qin Shiliang did not guard Xianxia, and the hundreds of thousands of refugees inside and outside the city were watching. Su Fengyan wanted these refugees to fight to the death for Beiliang. One idiotic dream. Beiliang thought that the meticulous Su Beiji was far superior to the soft-hearted Qin Shiliang. Humph! This is the true definition of being short-sighted. Only by being virtuous and virtuous can one be like the North Star of the heavens. Wherever one is protected by the stars. Only then can one be considered to have the support of many. If Beiliang only had the military heart, but not the people's will, then even if all 300,000 soldiers died, they still wouldn't be able to defend the northwest gate of Liang. Then, at that time, Su Fengyan, who was still His Royal Highness, said in the imperial road in the capital that he wanted to guard the country's gate for the common people of the Central Plains so that they would not be disturbed by the horseshoes of Beimang. It's just bullshit that will make people laugh their heads off. The errand boy at the side widened his eyes. His master, who had always been gentle and refined, was speaking so bluntly. Su Fengyan nodded silently. Yu Dilong squatted next to his master. He certainly couldn't understand, but he still felt that this slightly older scholar from Jiangnan was quite energetic when he spoke. He seemed to have more momentum than the Jianghu masters. Momentum. Yu Dilong, who was staring at Song Dongming, was a little puzzled. How could a scholar like him have such momentum after reading a few books? Was there such a good thing in the world? Should he go back and tell his master that he should also go and learn to read? Su Fengyan was silent for a moment, then smiled and asked, "The Crown Prince, Yin Maochun, is presiding over the examinations for officials outside the capital. Mr. Song is traveling in the cold, so I presume you're not in the position to become an official? With Mr. Song's military strategy, why not become an official?" The errand boy snorted coldly. Obviously, he felt that this kind of idiotic question was insulting his master. Song Dongming suddenly felt a little sad. He closed his eyes and faintly showed an expression of uncontrollable pain. He sighed softly and said, "To be honest, someone in the capital once asked me the same thing. I can only say that it was given by others, not what I asked for." Song Dongming seemed to have realized that it was not appropriate for him to reveal his true feelings. He smiled and said, "Young Master Su, are you going to Qingsong City this time?" Su Fengyan shook his head. Yu Dilong looked at his master without batting an eyelid. Song Dongming said, "Then let's part ways here." Su Fengyan clasped his hands and said goodbye. He took Yu Dilong back to the Fu family's caravan. Su Fengyan suddenly remembered the incident recorded in the Northern Liang spy report. Song Dongming, who had been chosen by Yuan Bunshi long ago, had passed the imperial examinations and passed the minor examinations. First, he had passed the imperial examinations. Before he had even reached the age of 20, he had passed the imperial examinations. Even the young emperor was shocked by this person's extensive knowledge and almost wanted to grant him marriage. Unexpectedly, this person had immediately married a woman of low status when he returned home. His major examinations were only one rank lower than the top scholar, but his minor examinations were so small that it was regrettable. It was a pity that such a distinguished person was unwilling to marry a woman from the Zhao family who was of equal status. After that, Song Dongming quickly lost his wife and had no children. After so many years, he did not marry or remarry. He did not even have a concubine. He spent most of his time traveling the north and south of the Yangtze River. The spy report vaguely mentioned that the death of Song Dongming's wife was not normal. The Song family of Deer Town was a powerful family, and Song Dongming was a talented person who had the potential to enter the imperial court as a minister. Who would dare to act so crazily? The number of people in Liang could be counted with 2 hands. Su Fengnian, who had walked far away, could not help but look back. He had once passed by Lu Xuan of Xiangfan City. This time, he should not miss him again. Su Fengnian whistled and slowly raised his hand. Not long after, a handsome white falcon quickly landed on his arm. Over there, Song Dongming and his servant continued to walk with difficulty in the sandstorm of Maozong Mountain. The servant walked beside his teacher and lifted the gauze mask that covered his mouth to cover the yellow sand. He said loudly, "Teacher, this Su Qi should be from a tall family in Beiliang, right?" Song Dongming smiled and said, "Your words are even more difficult to pronounce than mine." The servant laughed and quickly turned his head to spit out the yellow sand. "Teacher, when can we meet the young king if we are wandering around like this? Didn't you say that Beiliang still needs a good assistant minister to strategize?" "Teacher, you have a strategy of 10 wins and 10 losses in your heart." Song Dongming said calmly, "It depends on fate. Also, I still have to see if Su Fengnian is the wise ruler in my heart." The servant had a bitter expression and said, "Teacher, even if he can carry out his ambitions, what will happen to the Deer Song family?" The Yu family, whose eldest grandson Yu Luandao went to Beiliang to join the army, is a lesson learned from the past. Song Dongming shook his head and said, "Today is different from the past. West Chu has been reinstated. If the court suppresses the Song family, they will have to pay the price of causing unrest in the Central Plains. Also, Song Dongming has been a pawn of Great Peace City for a long time. It does not matter where he lands. Maybe Teacher Yuan will be happy to see this happen." The servant sighed like an old man. Song Dongming looked forward with a determined gaze. "Teacher Yuan, you said that you have to be willing to give up. You have to give up something to gain something. Therefore, you are forcing me to make a choice." But how could Song Dongming not know this shallow truth? "It is just that I am not willing to exchange what you think is a small sacrifice for the position of Prime Minister. I, Song Dongming, have always been an idiot. Just like I do not know if good people really have good karma, but I am willing to believe. Just like how people do not believe that Su Fengnian and Beiliang can defend the Northwest, but I am willing to believe." As Song Dongming walked, his eyes became wet. His lips trembled slightly. He was almost silently humming a little song that the woman who had died young often sang. "East, west, north, south, north, east, west. I only wish to accompany without parting. This life, the next life, the next life, this life, who can meet again?" Chapter 1180. When Su Fengnian and Yu Dilong returned to the Fu family's caravan, they naturally did not receive any good treatment. Su Fengnian apologized to Feng Qianxiang, who took advantage of the situation and did not press the matter. As an experienced Jianghu veteran, he knew that when one was outside, having more familiar faces meant having more options. If someone asked for help today, they might have to ask for help tomorrow. The caravan continued to move forward. After passing through the Horsemang Mountain, they followed a winding river that had been dried up for many years. Yudilong held a handful of green needlegrass and caragana in his hands. From time to time, he would put them into his mouth and chew out the pitiful juice. After becoming his disciple, his master did not teach him any unique martial arts. He only taught him 7 types of breathing methods, 6 types of breathing, and 1 type of breathing. His master had jokingly said that if he practiced diligently according to this stupid method, once he reached the stage of perfection, it would be equivalent to practicing martial arts in his sleep. Perhaps one day, he would be able to produce thunder with his breath. Yu Dilong did as he was told. After all, there was nothing for this child to do other than breathing in and out in the same way. Su Fengyan rode on horseback. Occasionally, he would pay attention to Yu Dilong's breathing, but most of the time, he was mentally wandering. Other than the group of spies from the Fish Dragon Gang, there was also the great Gesong Yuan who had followed him from the great snow plateau of Mount Hui to the northern Liang. Recently, the master of the Heavy Sword Cave, Mi Fengjie, who was not well known in Jianghu, had taken the position of consecrator. Fan Xiaochai was also hiding in the dark to protect Lunarong. She was already known as the most powerful and wealthy woman in Jianghu, in northern Liang. Of course, Su Fengyan was the one who actually spent money to buy land and mansions. Su Fengyan even took out more than 10 boxes of secret martial arts manuals from the Tide Listening Pavilion and gave them to the Fish Dragon Gang. Although they were all second-rate and third-rate manuals, they were enough to make Jianghu people fight for a place in the Fish Dragon Gang. Now, the Fish Dragon Gang really had both face and power. No one dared to say that the 10th most powerful gang in the world was just a motley crew. Su Fengyan did not expect these slippery Jianghu people who cherished their lives and reputation to work for Beiliang. But once the war started, Beiliang needed a stable backyard. The Fish Dragon Gang had already reached 2,000 people. At the very least, they could ensure that Lingzhou, this granary, was as stable as a rock. If the Fish Dragon Gang was just icing on the cake, then the Fu family had been providing timely assistance to Beiliang for 20 years. The family that Fu Jinxing belonged to was led by his father's generation of 7. They led their clansmen and trusted aides to silently travel through the 3 prefectures of Beiliang. A few years ago, they had even traveled to the western region. With the strength of the family, they managed to find 80% of the mines in northern Liang. However, the old and young members of the Fu family were puzzled. Why did the northern Liang government only record these mines and send soldiers to seal off the mountains and not mine them when it was clearly not difficult to open the mountains? Fu Jinxing's father had personally found a huge iron mine that could produce 600,000 caddies of iron in a year. The Liang dynasty's iron harvest during the last years of Yonghui dynasty was only 6,500,000 caddies. Fu Jinxing's father also helped Beiliang find a mercury source in Gangquan County that had a total annual income of 1,600 caddies. This was almost 30% of the entire Liang dynasty. Other than that, there were also the 3 major mines that produce copper in Beiliang. They were Qingshui Mine, Baoxing Mine, and Jianan Mine. Without exception, the Fu family was responsible for their appearance. Why did Su Xiao personally go to Old Master Fu's mourning hall to pay his respects? This was the reason. When Liang and Meng went to war in the future, what they competed in wasn't just the number of soldiers in the border army, but also the strength of northern Meng and the resilience of northern Liang. Once they clashed, both sides were well aware that no one could do the magnificent feat of smashing the other to death with a single hammer strike. The key was to see who had accumulated enough resources and could stall for the longest time. Although Beiliang's salt and iron official camps seemed to be controlled by those local tyrannical generals, Li Yishan had long ago proposed that the benefits of the mountains and lakes are easily exhausted. Therefore, he had simply closed the mountains and sealed the mines. He had never reported it to the imperial court. Instead, he used the local officials to fill their own pockets as a smokescreen. The local officials had been purchasing relevant materials from outside of Beiliang for many years without hesitation. However, the method was very secretive, and it was only a small business that accumulated over time, so it would not attract too much attention. Even if some knowledgeable people in the imperial court noticed some clues, it would not be appropriate for them to denounce them. This was because it was not only Beiliang's Dao Mountain that was high and the emperor was far away. Beiliang's Yuzhou and Lingzhou bordering Beiliang. Except for Gu Jintang's former generals who were in charge of the military power, the local officials had also been infiltrated. In the past 10 years, which of those officials had not become rich when they became an official? When they left office, they had both a good reputation and a lot of money. Moreover, this kind of thing that was beneficial to the people in their jurisdiction was something that everyone was doing. The law could not punish the majority. Could it be that the imperial court was going to throw the hat of treason on them? When the butcher Su Xiao was still alive, which of the civil and military officials in the imperial court dared to do so? The horse caravan slowly moved forward against the wind and sand. Su Fengnian bit his lips. Su Xiao definitely did not leave his son a mess in Bailiang. Instead, it was a Bailiang with powerful armors. Su Fengnian glanced sideways and saw Fu Jinxing turn his horse around and gallop over to him. Fu Jinxing then rode side by side with him. Su Fengnian looked at this young face that did not have any worldly wisdom and felt guilty. After Fu Jinxing's father found the gold mine west of Fengxiang town, he stayed in the same place and continued to explore. He sent his confidant back to Bailiang to report the good news. In the end, he died at the hands of a group of horse bandits who were roaming around. Other than Fu Jinxing's father, there were 16 other members of the Fu family who died in battle. Their bodies had not been found yet. As for Fu Jinxing, a member of Lingzhou who was a burden to the family, he was once beaten up by a group of local hedonistic sons after he saw injustice on the road. However, the Fu family did not complain to Bailiang because of this. The spies of the Whispering Chamber who were dormant in Lingzhou had strict rules. They would not stand up for the eldest son of the third branch of the Fu family because of this. The wind and sand were raging. Fu Jinxing had no choice but to say loudly, "Young Master Su, we are still 90 miles away from Xianxia City. We plan to travel through the night and finish this part of the journey in one go. I hope that young Master Su can hold on for a while." Su Fengnian nodded without hesitation and said with a smile, "As a guest, I will follow the host's wishes. This time, my disciple and I have to thank Mr. Fu for taking care of us on the way to Xianxia City. I hope that in the future, I will have the opportunity to treat you to a drink."